Thank you.
Conference, can I welcome you back to this afternoon's session? It's my absolute pleasure to introduce my MP this afternoon, the Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland, Ian Murray.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. You'll have noticed that most of the applause came from our selected candidates. They obviously got the memo. But hello, Conference. It's great to be here, and it's fantastic to be at the biggest Scottish Labour Party conference in history. We have more guests, more exhibitors, more members attending than ever before. And of course, more Scottish Labour MPs are attending here too. No longer can the SNP shout "Lonely Murray." And the best news yet, Edinburgh Zoo has sent back the pandas, so those jokes are finished as well. Michael Shanks is an outstanding representative for his constituents, and he will make a huge contribution to the country. Thank you to everyone who helped get Michael elected. But I have two massive downsides. I blame you all for my parliamentary office no longer being my own. And secondly, I blame you all for the £20 I lost to Dame Jackie Bailey on the size of the win. I promise to get it back. Conference, a lot has happened in the last 12 months too. I got married not once, but 3 times. I have to say, all to the same woman, I have to. And it's great to have Mariam here today for our first Labour Party conference. This job is hardest on those that are closest to us, and they shoulder the weight of responsibility. It's their love and support that gets us through the good times and the bad. And I know Anas spoke of his son, Alian, being at his first conference yesterday. Well, my 3.5-year-old daughter, Zola, is here for her first 2. And hopefully it won't be too long until she's delivering some of those leaflets. I asked Zola this morning if she was looking forward to coming to this speech, and she said, and I quote, "Can I watch Paw Patrol on the iPad when you talk to everyone?" So thank you to Zola for her great support. Conference, we gather in Glasgow at a time of political instability in the world. As Anas spoke passionately about yesterday, the conference debated this morning, and many are marching today to highlight this, and marching all over the world as well. The situation in Israel and Palestine is heartbreaking and intolerable. We all want the same thing, for the hostages to be released and for the fighting to stop, and to stop now. And we need that ceasefire to sustain so that it can be a proper process towards a permanent peace with a 2-state solution and recognition for Palestine. The spiral of violence is not new, and it's a huge failure of the international community to find a peaceful resolution. The joint letter from Australia, New Zealand and Canada today echoes the calls from our own Shadow Foreign Secretary for this to stop and for there to be a political process for peace. A future UK Labour government will restore our tattered international reputation and work with the international community to reach an end to the violence once and for all. Conference, you don't have to look far in this city to see why so many people are demanding change. Nothing seems to work. Right now, 1 in 6 people of our fellow Scots are on an NHS waiting list. Compare that to the last Labour government, when waiting times were down to record lows and satisfaction in our NHS was at a record high. I recently spoke to one woman, 83 she is, and she's been told she'll have to wait 3 to 5 years for a hip replacement. Her response, not mine, "I'll be dead by then, son." Last year, 40% of all hip and knee replacements in Scotland were paid for privately. Working people paying to go private because the NHS can't treat them. Now, the Tories might be trying to privatise the NHS by the back door, but the SNP are doing it through the front door. Their new policy, the SNP think that nurses should pay higher taxes while energy giants should pay lower taxes. No wonder the people of Rutherglen and Wellingborough are crying out for change. And what a contrast it is with our changed Labour Party. When Anas became leader, we were languishing on 14% in the polls, fighting to not finish third or fourth. Commentators regularly discussing if the Scottish Labour Party would even survive. Today, our sights are firmly on first place. Thank you, Anas, not just for your impressive leadership, but for your friendship too. When Keir Starmer took over the UK party, we had suffered a historic defeat. Today, we're a credible government in waiting, back in the service of working people and the country, putting country before party for the benefit of every part of our country. What a change both Anas and Keir have made, and what a contrast to our shambolic opponents. In Scotland, many of us have long known the Tories for what they are, out of touch and uninterested in the challenges of working people. But even I've been shocked by the lows the Tory party has dropped to. And don't let them get away with disowning the last 14 years. They have failed in everything they've done. Everything is worse. Nothing works. Working people are poorer while having to deal with the highest tax burden in 70 years. This is the highest taxing parliament in history. 14 years of using working people as an experiment for their failed economic dogma. And this week, Rishi's recession. Easy to say before you've had a drink. And it's not just 2 quarters of decline, it's 7. The longest period of economic decline on record. Our economy is now smaller today than when Rishi Sunak entered 10 Downing Street. And guess what? They want 5 more years. The Tories failing Scots is hardly new. But what might surprise more people is the depths to which the SNP have also plunged. The former First Minister, promising bereaved families live on television she would retain all records, while the very same day mass deleting those very records. The current First Minister, protecting a health secretary who took the public and Parliament for fools. And that's not even to talk about the cover-ups, the secrecy, the police investigations. So let us use this moment to reject the politics of division and deliver long-lasting change. Conference, I believe we can deliver. As Anas reminded us just a few times yesterday, electing a Labour government is the change that Scotland needs. Almost exactly 100 years ago, the very first Labour government was formed. It was a period of changing prime ministers, a cost of living crisis, and Russian misinformation. 100 years later, some things never change. But it was also a great period of Scottish Labour history. When you look at the Scottish election map of 1924, it looked a lot like we'll need the map to look in 2024. From coast to coast in the Central Belt, it was a wall of red. The first Labour Prime Minister was a Scot. His Home Secretary, who introduced the landmark housing bill, was the MP for Glasgow Shettleston. And the Labour MP for the Gorbals introduced the first attempt at Scottish devolution. Scots then were at the heart of the Labour government, and they must be again. In Scotland, this is the choice for voters. We can either send a message to Westminster, or we can send a government, and I say we send a government. Because Conference, despite only being in power for 30 of those 100 years, we've achieved fundamental change for the country together. The last Labour government transformed lives, and the next one will do too. Take a run-of-the-mill Scottish family, their living standards dropping like a stone. The mum who, when Labour was last in power, had secure employment. She's now on a 0-hours contract. Her pay, her take-home pay, at the same level as 2007. How will her life improve with Labour? Well, our New Deal for working people will mark the biggest increase in workers' rights in decades. 0-hours contracts banned. The grotesque practice of fire and rehire outlawed. Sick pay expanded. In-work poverty eliminated. We'll give everyone protections at work from day one for their security. And we'll repeal the anti-trade union legislation introduced by the Tories. These reforms will transform the workplace under a Labour government. and they will transform the lives of millions of people who are currently working harder for less. The statistic that 3/4 of children living in poverty are from a family unit where one or both parents are in work must end. Conference, that's the change Scotland needs. And Conference, there's more. A lot of families have sons and daughters rightly concerned about the environment and keen to spend their careers helping to solve the crisis for us. Our Green Prosperity Plan has been in the news recently, just a little bit. But we should not shy away from how bold and ambitious that plan actually is. Let's be honest with people. Since the Tories crashed the economy last year, borrowing has become more expensive. I don't need to tell anyone with a mortgage or paying rent about that. Our economy is in a different state to what it was in 2021, with the Tories inflicting indescribable damage. But despite what Sunak wants you to believe, it remains an enormous package of investment and change in Britain's economy. It means switching on publicly owned GB Energy, headquartered here in Scotland, capitalised with billions to invest in the green industrial revolution. 50,000 green jobs here in Scotland. Huge investment in our port infrastructure to prepare us for the industry of the future. And our objective remains unchanged. Clean, green power by 2030. That's the promise, and that's what we'll deliver. And to help deliver that, a whole generation of Scots, young and old, will play their part. Tens of thousands of families will benefit directly from the boldness of the next Labour government. Until now, Scotland has been let down when it comes to the potential of our clean energy. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Switzerland, where their mountainous landscape has allowed them to generate 50% of their energy from pumped hydrogen. We have the potential to do similar, but politicians here have taken their eye off the ball. Compare our mission for clean energy by 2030 with the SNP's ScotWind licensing round. They undersold the rights to offshore wind sites around the coast. They used the money to plug their budget deficit. Climate change requires bold action. That's what Labour will do. And you've guessed it, that's the change Scotland needs. And something that every family in Scotland will have noticed over the last decade is the lack of economic growth. Household bills taking up an ever-growing percentage of family income, or in some cases all of it. Public services cut because there's not the tax receipts to pay for it. All of the difficulties in our country, which I've talked about, root from poor decisions and, most of all, a lack of growth. Both our governments have been more interested in fighting with each other about the Constitution, causing rammies, than growing our economy. We can't fund public services because there is no growth. We can't clean up our streets because there's no growth. And we can't deliver opportunity for the next generation because there is no growth. And that's why Keir has made our primary mission of the next Labour government to grow the economy. The late, great Alistair Darling, who we missed terribly after he died, understood that very well as the last Labour Chancellor. Scotland was an engine of growth before we helped build this nation in the modern world, and we can do so again. Under Labour, every family in Scotland will benefit from that growth. That truly is the change that Scotland needs, Conference. I've spoken before about our plans for the Scotland Office. For too many years, Scotland's government has focused only on selling Scotland to Scots or selling off Scotland's assets to the world. A Scotland Office seeing Scotland as something that had to be managed. A Labour government will change that. I want the Scotland Office to be Scotland's voice in Whitehall. I want the Scotland Office to be the delivery arm of the UK Labour government in Scotland. I want the Scotland Office to be Scotland's window to the world and sell Scotland to the world. Brand Scotland's an integral part of our plan to grow Scotland's economy. Wherever you go in the world, there's positive recognition for our cultural products, services, from whisky, medicine and smoked salmon to computer game development, higher education and financial services. I was told to take Heart of Midlothian Football Club out of that list. And on a visit to the Western Isles with our tremendous Labour candidate, Torquil Crichton. and it's a wonderful place to visit, because I saw salmon going to North America, Harris Tweed off to Asia and European markets. As Scottish Secretary, I want to lead a Scottish trade mission to every continent in the first 2 years. Maybe I might leave Antarctica for the next term. But Brand Scotland's vital to our economic growth, and we will see the foreign trade and Scottish secretaries for the first time working together in every part of the globe to champion that brand Scotland. We need that growth, because that's the change that Scotland needs. That and so much more can be achieved by electing our wonderful Scottish Labour candidates to become MPs and deliver for their communities at the heart of the next Labour government. Here in Glasgow, the birthplace of the modern Labour movement, we can turn the city red. In Edinburgh, we can deliver Labour MPs again. In every community from Largs to Leith, we can elect Labour MPs who will stand up for you and your family. Conference, think of how you felt this Friday morning, waking up to the news of 2 more seismic Labour by-election victories in Kingswood and Wellingborough. And imagine, just imagine for 1 second what that feeling would be like waking up the morning after the general election to see a Labour government. Keir walking up Downing Street as Sunak packs his bags. And how good will it feel for Scotland to lead the way in getting rid of this Tory government? So, Mr. Sunak, if you're watching, and I doubt it, call the election and put yourself and the country out of this Tory misery, and call it now. Conference, the entirety of the Labour movement and others should join us to send not just a message to Westminster, that achieves nothing, but a government. Because as my political hero John Smith famously said, all we ask is the opportunity to serve. That's the change Scotland needs. Conference, let's deliver it together.
Are we doing a swap? Sorry.
Impromptu swap.
Thank you, Ian, for that fantastic talk there. And I think he's now off to watch Puppy Patrol with his daughter, I think. Yeah. So we're going to move on to our next debate session, which is the change we need to rebuild our NHS. And to open this debate, we're joined by Dame Jackie Baillie, it says here.
goodness sake, I thought you were all standing up to leave. I'm glad you decided to stay. Conference, you know, it is truly wonderful to be here with you on the banks of the Clyde, near, of course, to the home of our newest MP, Michael Shanks, after his stunning by-election victory in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. And let's send many more Scottish Labour MPs to join Michael and Ian Murray. The stakes could not be higher. This year will go down in history as a watershed moment in our politics and in the story of our country. This is the year where we have the chance to turn our backs on the politics of division and despair. We can turn the page on the politics of decline, on the politics of sleaze, and on the politics of chaos. Because this is the legacy of 17 years of the SNP and 14 years of the Tories. And this is not as good as it gets. Change can come, and believe me, Conference, change is coming with a Labour-led government by Keir Starmer and, wait for it, in 2026, a Labour government in Scotland led by my friend Anas Sarwar. But you know, it's not enough to just talk about change. We need to lay out why we need change and what the change is that Labour will deliver. As we gather here today, all of Scotland's public services are in disarray. The economy is stagnating. People are crying out for help as bills soar and prices bite. Labour's greatest achievement is the NHS, and its very existence is now at risk. Let me break with tradition and welcome the new Health Secretary, Neil Gray. Hard-working, unassuming, dedicated. No, I'm not talking about Mr. Gray. That's how his predecessor, Michael Matheson, was described before he racked up roaming charges. Now, Mr. Gray has a hard task ahead as he tries to get to grips with 17 years of SNP failure. I just hope he puts medical issues ahead of Moroccan escapades, because he cannot afford to be distracted, because the failure is clear for all to see. 1 in 6 Scots are stuck on a waiting list, many having to raid the family savings to go private. A&E departments are overwhelmed, and last year, a shocking 7,300 Scots waited more than a day in A&E. Cancer remains Scotland's biggest killer, and yet life-saving treatment targets are being missed. Primary care is on its knees. GPs have been let down, and patients are suffering the consequences of that underinvestment. Health inequalities are widening, with death rates almost twice as high in our poorest areas. And shockingly, life expectancy in Scotland has fallen for the 3rd year in a row, an unprecedented decline. Our heroic NHS staff, nurses, doctors, porters, all of them are working around the clock, but they're being failed by this government. Dentistry in a perilous state, with more and more people unable to access an NHS dentist and forced to go private. Sadly, a 2-tier health service is fast becoming the norm under the SNP in Scotland. Conference, we must never, ever lose sight of what is the most important thing about our NHS, and that is the care of patients. There is not a single person in this room who has not been a patient or will not be a patient in the future in our NHS. But sadly, due to 17 years of SNP failure, the situation for patients is simply getting worse. That's why at the heart of all of Labour's plans to renew the NHS are patients. An NHS where we're not simply treating illness after the fact, but investing in preventative care and building together healthier communities right the way across Scotland. But let me be honest with you, Conference. We have a mammoth task ahead, and sticking plasters simply won't work anymore. We need radical change throughout the system to make it fit for the future. And so just as we are the party who created the NHS, it's our job now to save it, and that is the change that Scotland needs. Now, last year at party conference, I laid out Labour's plans to scrap the health boards. At the moment, we have over 50 health and social care bodies for a country of 5 million people. Conference, that's top-heavy, is inefficient, is unsustainable. We need a greater focus on primary care, devolving decision-making to local areas, including rural and island communities, and having doctors and nurses shaping the future of the service. We need to operate as one NHS, with decisions made locally in the interests of patients. Yesterday, Anas set out Labour's bold plan to use money reclaimed by ending the non-dom tax loophole. A Scottish Labour government will deliver 160,000 more NHS appointments every year to slash waiting lists. Our plan will lead to people being treated faster, saving lives, boosting productivity and getting our country working again. Because this is the change patients need. This is the change Scotland needs. But our plans for the NHS are about so much more than short-term sticking plaster solutions. And that's why today I can announce that a future Scottish Labour government will establish a national clinical council made up of health professionals to advise the government on how best to run the NHS. The clinical council will be made up of those who know the NHS best, the doctors, the nurses, the allied health professionals, every single one of them at the interface of our NHS, the people who are saving lives day in and day out. And conference, let me reassure you, this is no gimmick, this is no cheap headline, because our NHS is much too important for that. That's why this council will be a statutory body that is empowered to advise health ministers on service change and workforce planning. And critically, given the toxic culture of cover-up and secrecy we've witnessed in the SNP government, the council will advise on patient safety, because we owe this to Millie Main's family and to all the victims of clinical malpractice, whether it's those people treated by Dr. El Jamel in Tayside or the mesh-injured women who campaign so hard for justice. And I promise you this, that corporate cover-up will not be tolerated in the NHS under a Scottish Labour government. Working for the people of Scotland, the Council will advise ministers on what the NHS needs and will have their voice heard at the very highest level of government, putting their expertise at the heart of government, valuing their service and enormous potential. This is how we deliver the patient-centred NHS of the future. This conference is the change that a Scottish Labour government will make to our NHS. This is the change Scotland needs. And as we tackle waiting lists, as we empower clinicians, as we take on bureaucracy that has stifled our NHS, we also need to look to the future. Do you know, it is hard to believe when I look around this room, but we are an ageing population. And of course, that's a good thing. But as we age, the stresses upon our NHS will only be greater. Worryingly, in far too many ways, the NHS is still stuck in the past. We have an NHS that hasn't undergone major technological change since the last century. And this has led to the bizarre situation where in the year 2024, doctors are still carrying bleepers. Patients still get letters for appointments that have long passed. And we have exhausted GPs thumbing through prescriptions that need to be signed manually when other digital options exist and are already used elsewhere in the UK. We also have CT scanners, MRI machines that are frankly decades old. Put simply, our NHS is stuck in the 20th century, and under the SNP, we have analogue working in a digital age. And that's why Scottish Labour is committed to harnessing the opportunities that digital technology offer to modernise our NHS. And in doing so, we can transform healthcare, ensure that clinicians have access to state-of-the-art technology so that they can diagnose patients earlier, faster, and improve outcomes. And we need to make it easier for patients to book appointments themselves and ultimately control how they interact with NHS services. I have to tell you, we have innovative tech companies headquartered in Scotland providing digital solutions for NHS England. Their innovation is ignored by the Scottish Government, and we need to end that. Scotland is standing still as other countries invest in the future of healthcare. So we will put this right. We will ensure that patients and staff can benefit from the opportunities digital innovation offers, because this conference is the change our NHS needs. And you know, the need for change could not be clearer. As we stand here today, the SNP government has demonstrated that they are not capable of protecting our NHS for the future. Thanks to their financial mismanagement, scores of vital infrastructure projects right the way across Scotland have been cancelled. From the Edinburgh Eye Pavilion to the flagship national treatment centres in Ayrshire and Arran, Grampian, Lanarkshire, Lothian, Tayside, gone. The Cancer Centre in Edinburgh, gone. Barra Hospital, gone. The redesign of Caithness General Hospital and the revamping of Raigmore's maternity services, gone. The desperately needed health centres and GP surgeries in East Calder, in Lochgelly, in Kincardine, gone. All of them cancelled or delayed indefinitely. And in the Cabinet Secretary's own backyard, the downgrading of the world-beating Wishaw neonatal unit, the Monklands replacement project now under threat, and we learn NHS Lanarkshire is facing over £100 million of a black hole in their budget. But why does any of this matter? Because it's the reality of SNP broken promises to communities the length and breadth of Scotland. Our NHS is in crisis, and at the very time when investment is so desperately needed, the SNP choose to pull the plug. And they have no answers about what they will do instead. No vision, no ideas for the future. Blame somebody else and take no responsibility for their incompetence and their failure. And it's the people of Scotland that pay the price. Conference, that is why we need change. But it's not just the NHS that the SNP are failing. Look at social care. We have thousands of people in need of care packages being turned away. Not just numbers on a spreadsheet, but our family, our friends, and our neighbours. And for those who have a care package at home, they are burdened with care charges that the SNP promised to abolish and then refused to do so. Now, we know that supporting our citizens to live independently in their own communities is about dignity and it is about respect. But the SNP just don't get it. And that's why they remain wedded to a national care service bill that will be delayed for years and will cost billions of pounds, with not one penny of that going on care just now. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. Scottish Labour supports the creation of a national care service. It was our idea in the first place, but this bill, as it stands, simply does not work. So that's why today I'm calling on Neil Gray to act immediately to fix our broken care services, remove non-residential care charges, support unpaid carers, implement Anne's Law now and urgently address the shortage of care packages. Our social care workforce is frankly worth their weight in gold. We know that caring is not simply a job, it's a vocation. And that's why Labour is committed to ensuring that care workers are treated and valued like the professionals we know they are. A UK Labour government will deliver its New Deal for working people to make work pay. That will benefit care workers and it will also benefit staff in the NHS, some of whom are on 0 hours contracts. And conference, let me say this. The SNP, and yes, the Scottish Greens, they might be happy with £12 per hour for care workers, but we're not. The fight for 15 continues, because that is the change that Scotland needs. Conference, we are the party that delivered the NHS. We will fight for its future. For too long, the people of Scotland have paid the price of SNP mismanagement and failure. Their time is up, because this year will be a watershed moment in politics. But it is the beginning of a journey and not the end. By electing more Scottish Labour MPs, we increase our influence at the very heart of a UK Labour government. A Labour government that will transform our NHS and deliver for the people of Scotland. Conference, we are the change that Scotland needs. Let's get out there and change our country.
So, Conference, I think that's our debate on the future of our NHS, well and truly opened by Dame Jackie there. Excellent. And I think, I'm going to embarrass her more by saying I think she really is the change that our NHS needs. That's right, I'm a sook. So we're going to, this debate session will follow the same process as this morning. We have a number of motions. I'm just going to talk through them quite quickly. We have a composite motion 6 on the National Care Service, submitted by Renfrewshire South CLP and Scottish Labour Women's Conference, and it was initially proposed there by Unite the Union. We have composite motion 7 on the NHS and social care workforce, and that was submitted by Dunfermline CLP and Unison. Motion 12 on neonatal services, submitted by Scottish Labour Women's Conference, initially proposed by Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse CLP. Motion 13 on NHS workforce planning, submitted by Aberdeen South and North Kincardine CLP. Motion 14 on mental health services. Was that actually withdrawn? Sorry, motion 14 on mental health services has been withdrawn. Motion 15 on improving oral health, submitted by the Socialist Health Association Scotland, and motion 16 on NHS waiting times, submitted by Dumbarton CLP. Now, as is before, movers get 5 minutes, seconders 3, and then if there's time, and I hope there is, for responses from the floor, they also get 3 minutes. So can we have the mover of composite motion 6 come to the rostrum, please? You were there waiting for us. Well done.
Yep. Chair, Katrina Murray, Unison Scotland. I'm proud to be Scottish Labour's parliamentary candidate for Cumbernauld and Kirkintilloch. Moving composite motion 6 on behalf of the annual Women's Conference. And to be honest, in preparing for this, I looked back at the speeches we made on the National Care Service last year before that, the one before that as well, and pretty much every debate since Jackie Baillie first floated this concept of the National Care Service, what seems to be a lifetime ago. So here we go again. Another year without a National Care Service. And don't get me wrong, the version that the SNP government proposed bore absolutely no semblance to the National Care Service that we as the trade unions and the Labour family have argued for over the last decade. We do not need a centralised power grab. We do not need the transfer of staff away from our councils and our NHS. But what we do need is a service that works and delivers for our communities. Because Conference social care is in crisis. It's a service run on a shoestring with some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. Some of those with the most complex needs are cared for by women, working in some of the most precarious and low-paid jobs with the most responsibility. For too long, social care has been a race to the bottom. Contracts commissioned to the care provider that charges the least, which means 0-hour contracts. No enhancements for working unsocial hours or sleepovers. Minimal pension provision, meaning that women don't just have a pay gap, there is a gender pension gap. Spending your own time doing your mandatory training. Putting your work rota app on your own personal mobile phone so you have no opportunity to disconnect. There are so many reasons we need to sort out social care. As Jackie said, every single one of us deserve to have dignity when we're in receipt of care, to be cared for as far as possible in a place that we are safe, we are secure, and we can call our home. Because every family member who is providing care for their loved ones deserves support and respite. And because every night that somebody spends in an acute hospital bed when they do not need acute medical care is a night when someone else who is waiting for that treatment doesn't get it. Conference, we need to get this right. We need a national care service worthy of the name. And according to the Association of Public Sector Excellence, in a report commissioned by Unison Scotland, the public sector-based national care service is not only affordable, but it's absolutely necessary. That by using our existing public service structures, we can work together to insource these services using our national strategy. Conference, the future of social care is in our hands. And Conference, we need that to make the change. I move.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you. You're very welcome.
Linda Clark, Unite, and also on the Scottish Women's Committee. Comrades, Katrina is absolutely right. For years, this conference has made an unequivocal commitment. It has resolved to campaign for and deliver a publicly owned national care service. And the Scottish Women's Conference in November was unanimous in the view that a commitment to a publicly owned national care service should be a manifesto priority. That was actually one of the key aspects of that motion, a manifesto priority. And we are a bit baffled that that was not included in the composite. Nevertheless, the purpose of this motion is to take us one step further towards our stated goal. Now, comrades, Labour has long argued for the end to marketisation in social care. That's a vision that we all agree with. But it's a vision that needs a strategic implementation plan. Otherwise, it can seem like a never-ending pipe dream. The National Health Service cannot survive properly without a national care service. And we believe it's important that we add to Labour's vision by making it very explicit and very clear in our next manifesto that Scottish Labour will, in the next parliamentary term, develop plans to lay the foundation for creating a real not-for-profit national care service. Thanks. Comrades, in a market economy where the private sector dominates, there is mounting evidence, and Unison has shown this, there's mounting evidence that governments have a limited ability to make to manage failing care services is very, very, very challenging, because any significant proportion of government funding increases is quite likely to end up in increased management fees, higher rents and charges, and a higher return on investment to investors. As long as we are a hostage to the market, care workers' pay, their terms and conditions and care standards will continue to suffer. And then, of course, the profits decline in these private companies. Many of these private providers will simply exit the market, as they've done in the past, leaving workers, local authorities high and dry, having to deal with the consequences. Comrades, in 1948, when the health services were in a similar mess, Bevan nationalised the infrastructure, and the National Health Service was born, and it has sustained us for over 70 years. At this moment, social care is heading for collapse. It's time for a national care service, it's time for courageous policy making, and it's time for us to shout from the rooftops in our next manifesto that Scottish Labour will develop a plan to bring social care back into public ownership within an achievable timescale. Comrades, wouldn't that be a fantastic real vote winner? Thank you.
So thank you for that. Can I invite the mover of motion 7 on NHS and social care workforce to the rostrum?
Good afternoon, Conference. Wilma Brown, proud Unison member and trade unionist and candidate for Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy. Conference, without doubt, the biggest threat to our health and social care services is the crisis that we face around staffing issues. Every single day, on every single shift in hospital settings all over Scotland, there is an almost impossible challenge to ensure there are the required number of registered and non-registered staff to provide optimum care for patients. Staff are constantly moved from one area to another, often out with their own specialities, to attempt balancing the risks associated with patient safety. This constant movement adds to the stress and anxieties of staff, which can have a detrimental impact on providing optimum care to patients, as well as being a contributing factor in affecting staff well-being and a definite increase in staff absence. This will also cause further challenge to health boards who are currently struggling to devise plans on how they can implement and maintain the safe staffing legislation, which is due to come into play in April this year. We face this extremely challenging situation due to SNP health secretaries failing to address the required workforce planning year on year. Health secretaries being a prime example of people being promoted to their level of incompetence rather than competence. All 22 boards must submit an annual workforce plan to Scottish Government, which should form forward planning for training the doctors, nurses and allied health professionals of the future. However, the Scottish Government have failed year on year to address these issues. 2024 will be the third year in a row that we have not reached the required number of applications for nursing places at universities across Scotland, a problem that will affect us all as we begin to get older. It's exactly the same situation in social care. The number one reason for vulnerable patients being stuck in hospital is the lack of staff to provide care at home rather than spending more time in hospital. The overwhelming evidence is that patients come to more harm, both physically and mentally, when they are left languishing in hospital beds rather than receiving the care and rehab that they require being appropriately delivered in their own homes, an environment where they feel comfortable and very much less anxious. It is clearly evident that the health and social care recruitment and retention crisis is only worsening under the SNP. Home care is a vital service that we are currently struggling to recruit into, a service that helps to prevent hospital admissions and the service that ensures people can return home following a hospital stay. However, it does not appear to be a role that is valued in terms of pay. Currently, most home carers don't even receive the real living wage. The call to improve this is long overdue. We know this to be the case because those same members approach Unison for help and support for access to our welfare system. I also have personal experience from the Cottage Family Centre in Kirkcaldy, which raises funds every year to deliver Christmas for vulnerable families. Conference, our staff have become those vulnerable families. On delivery day last year in 23, I was out there delivering these Christmas food parcels and gifts to vulnerable families and was absolutely humbled to see the amount of people who were employed within health and care services and who were what we call now the working poor. The vulnerable patients who depend on these people are the same people who sometimes give in to the funds that we are raising for. Conference, with Scottish Labour, we must work together to ensure we are delivering a workforce fit for the present and for the future. We need Scottish Labour to commit to attracting new staff and retaining current staff by developing career pathways and career progression opportunities in a service which values them. Career pathways must allow staff to develop in different ways, to develop the skills required and to provide professional, personal and clinical care to our citizens. And by doing this, adapting current pathways to include modern apprenticeships and on-the-job training programmes. It is imperative that the £15 per hour for social care staff is implemented as soon as possible and that NHS staff pay is restored to today's values after years of austerity. Health and social care staff deserve fair pay for patient care. I move.
Conference, Graham Downey, Dunfermline CLP and candidate for Dunfermline and Dollar for the general election this year, and part of the 5 takeover of Scottish Labour that we're going to see when Wilma and I are both elected this year. This year, when we will kick out the corrupt Conservative government and at the same time show the SNP that Scotland has had enough of their failures and their inability to look after the most vulnerable people in our communities. I see every day in my role as a councillor how hard social care staff work, how dedicated they are, and how much they want to help the people they care for. They are dealing with an impossible set of challenges in their job, their vocation. Rising demand, long hours, and increasingly more complex work. In any other sector, a predicted increase in demand with a need for more complex skills and a certainty that their services will be needed long into the future would be met with a drive to increase pay, improve conditions and hire more staff. And this is no other sector. This is a role where we expect the best, caring for people with dementia, providing palliative care and helping those with physical disabilities and all of the other incredible work undertaken by our social care workforce, staff who must be skilled, who must be trusted. But what do we see after 17 years of the SNP? Are social care workers valued? Well, Conference, I checked this morning. The top 3 care jobs you can get in Dunfermline today, £10.90 an hour, £10.90 an hour, and then some improvement. Conference £10.91 an hour. The SNP might have finally agreed to fund £12 an hour from April this year, but only after 3 years of campaigning, a delay which means even that increase has been more than wiped out by the SNP Tory cost of living crisis. Just last summer, I met a home care worker who lives in my ward in West Fife, and she told me how much she loved her work, how much she enjoyed caring for people. Well, Conference, I spoke to her again just before Christmas, and she had decided to leave social care. She said her new job isn't as rewarding. She misses her patients and the sense of satisfaction that she got from helping people. But her new job pays better, her shifts are more flexible, she gets to see her young family, she doesn't feel as stressed or overworked. The sad thing is, Conference, I don't blame her for taking that decision. It was the right thing for her and her family, but that is a story that we see across social care and all the health services, and indeed across all of our public services. Conference, we must start to value people in social care, where staff are helping people live independently in their own communities with dignity and helping them fulfil their potential. That must begin with a pay uplift for social care workers of £15 an hour. But it cannot end there. We need a comprehensive and long-term plan that values the most vital jobs in our society and looking after the most vulnerable in our society. Conference, thank you, and please support Composite Motion 7.
So next up we have motion 12, which is on neonatal services. You're very welcome.
Thank you, Conference. Lindsay Hamilton, the delegate for Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse. I remember after Women's Conference in November saying, what if this issue is fixed? What if the government have seen sense? But Conference, it won't shock you to know that I'm here in February to ask Scottish Labour Conference to join me and many people already in the party and some truly amazing local grassroots women to call on the SNP government to reverse their plans to downgrade the neonatal unit at University Hospital Wishaw. The proposals to downgrade this award-winning, and I'll stress award-winning, UK award-winning unit will mean that the sickest babies who are born at 27 weeks or less or have severe medical issues will be moved to Glasgow, Edinburgh or more than likely Aberdeen in the north of England due to the acute pressures put in the Central Belsh units. This is part of the outdated Best Start plan from the Scottish Government to reduce the Tier 3 neonatal units in Scotland from 6 to 3, creating so-called centres of excellence. The reality of this is that it could risk babies' lives. Women and families at the most vulnerable time could be separated from their very sick babies, and not to mention if you already have children, you will need to be separated from them as well. The worry and uncertainty of this will be devastating. I must admit, I come to this motion from an element of personal experience. I've been no stranger to Wishaw maternity unit in the past 3 years, having both my daughters there. My daughter Erin, who is now 3, was born suddenly at 34 weeks. And where she didn't need to go to the intensive care unit in Wishaw, we spent a length of time in ski boot and transitional care, where I saw the expertise and care the nurses and midwives provided for her. Conference, I can't describe the feelings around having a premature baby. You are terrified and trying to come to terms with what is happening. If you were to add to that the uncertainty of where your baby would be cared for or how far away you would be from your support unit, it's unthinkable. I have had the privilege in the past few months of meeting and campaigning with the amazing women and in fact the staff from the unit who have taken this fight to the Scottish Government. Many of their personal stories are heartbreaking, but seeing their little ones running about after the care they have received from Wishaw is amazing. Many of these women are adamant that their babies wouldn't be here without the care that they have received at Wishaw. The petition set up by them has received over 20,000 signatures, which just shows the strength of feeling that is behind this locally. The Minister claims that this is a consultant-led decision, and due to the changes in understanding of preterm babies and science over the years, will not mean that the babies will be moved to these units, they will be born there. Whereas actually, we know that none of the award-winning consultants were actually asked about this, and with all the will in the world, babies just come when they want. We are at a vital point in the campaign Conference. We have a new Health Minister in Neil Gray, MSP. The MSP for the constituency of Airdrie and Shotts, a constituency that this neonatal unit covers. It's time for you to call this in, Neil. It's time for you to be re-looked at and for the strength of feeling against it by your constituents and beyond to be recognised. Do the right thing and stop this from happening. With your indulgence, Conference, I'll briefly touch on maternity services in this country. The SNP are risking the lives of women and babies in cost-cutting measures. Maternity units are on their knees. They are short-staffed. Morale is at an all-time low. Things are being missed. This isn't just words. This is the reason why stillbirths and infant deaths is rising. This is the lives of babies and women that we are dealing with, and I know this all too well. If this isn't Wisha, the downgrading of the neonatal unit at Ninewells and Victoria Hospital in Kirkcaldy, not only that, it's failing to support the expecting mothers at Dr Gray's in Angus or Galloway Hospital in Stranraer, forcing them to travel hours when they're in labour. Conference, I will end on this. The SNP government are taking pregnant women in this country for fools. We need to stand up and tell the government no more. They are claiming they want to give our children the best start in life, but as always, the words don't mean the actions. We deserve to feel safe and supported when we are pregnant. We as a Labour Party need to show pregnant women that we are on their side. We will not stand for this. We will not sit back and let this happen to the future of our country. Thank you.
Andrew Doctor, Delegate for Rutherglen CLP, and I'm a first-time speaker as well. And can I just say how honoured it is I am actually to be following Lindsay. Lindsay obviously has real lived experience of the issues at the heart of this. And as the majority of this room will be, I am deeply concerned at the Scottish Government's decision to downgrade the award-winning neonatal services in Wishaw, Ninewells and Kirkcaldy. And I've got a personal stake in this because my mum is a neonatal nurse, and I can't tell you how proud I am of her and her colleagues for the invaluable work that they do. And recently, I had the opportunity to speak to the mothers of babies who were cared for in this unit, and it was incredibly emotional for me. In fact, I was overcome with emotion. And that in itself reinforced how vital the services offered by these units are. Conference, let's not be in any doubt here. This is a short-sighted and deliberate act of centralisation from an SNP administration that is hopelessly out of touch. I know a number of people across Lanarkshire and my community whose children have received the world-class care offered by the dedicated and talented staff at Wishaw Neonatal Unit, and I know that some of these people are here today. The SNP's proposals will separate mothers and families from their newborns at a time of immense stress, and indeed, this will add to their worries. When a baby's health is compromised, we know that it's best to keep them close to their mums, but these plans will be a barrier to this, and that is immoral. These plans will be harmful for families, will worsen health outcomes and will increase inequality, and in some cases they will risk babies' lives. 20,000 people and counting have now signed a petition to oppose the planned downgrade, and literally everybody that I speak to, regardless of where they are from, is in absolute disbelief at what the SNP is proposing here. It just does not make sense. It doesn't add up. To those SNP MSPs in the areas that will be affected by these plans, I say this: you are letting your constituents down. This is a betrayal of the vulnerable, and it is wrong. It's time for the Scottish Government to listen. There must be a rethink. There is far too much at stake. Thank you.
Two excellent speeches there. So now we have motion 13 moving.
Thank you, Chair. Sophie MacDonald, Aberdeen South and North Kincardine CLP, here to move motion 13 on workforce planning. I'm proud to work in our NHS. Now, thank you very much. The National Health Service at its best embodies everything this party believes in. Healthcare from all according to ability, to all according to need. Free at the point of delivery, with skills and experience brought together in a unified healthcare team for the common good. The healthcare team at its best is strong and supportive, supporting each and every patient journey throughout their lives, in all the interactions they have with the NHS, and with different members of the multidisciplinary team supporting each other too. Sadly, the NHS today is not at its best. As a result of too many years of short-term fixes instead of long-term planning, too little leadership from two failing governments, and not enough investment in the people who make the NHS work, the healthcare team. Resources, investment and leadership have all fallen short, but nowhere has the failure been greater than in the lack of effective workforce planning to design and develop the NHS healthcare teams of the future. And I believe with Labour governments at Westminster and Holyrood, it will change for the better, starting with the UK general election later this year. And I welcome Jackie's announcement today of a clinical council, including AHPs, to advise on workforce planning. Now, I work as a physician associate in the NHS. Compared with doctors and nurses, we are the new kids on the block. One of the new medical associated professions which has developed to strengthen the healthcare team in recent years. The first medical associated professionals in the Scottish NHS were brought in when Labour was back in charge in 2006. The first PAs trained and qualified in Scotland graduated from the University of Aberdeen as long ago as 2013. And Scottish trained PAs are now to be found working in the NHS the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. Physician associates, in my experience, enthusiastic about patient care, committed to team working and eager to develop our skills, just the attitudes we need in our NHS. Physician associates work in a wide range of healthcare settings. Since completing my training, I've worked in vascular surgery, in emergency medicine, and now in hospital at home. More and more GPs are also adding physician associates to the primary healthcare team. Anaesthesia associates and surgical care practitioners also work in relatively specialised roles in many of our major hospitals. Sadly, however, the evolution of regulation and recognition has not kept up with the growth of the healthcare team. Despite the fact that PAs have worked in the NHS for over a decade, it is only now that the Scottish and UK governments are getting round to putting the necessary governance in place. That matters, and it matters to all concerned. It matters to patients, who are entitled to know that every person who provides them with medical care is properly regulated and fully accountable, not just to their employer, but to their professional regulatory body. And it matters to other members of the healthcare team, who are entitled to assurance about the professional standing of all of their colleagues, and who need to be clear about what it is that every other member of the team can and cannot do. And it matters to those of us in the medical associated professions ourselves, because our disciplines will only develop as they should and make a growing contribution to the wider healthcare team if we have a robust regulatory system similar to doctors and nurses and other health professions and are held just as accountable as they are. So it is as a matter of regret that regulation has taken so long to be put in place. But we should celebrate the fact it's happening now and thank our Labour MPs and MSPs for backing that vital development at Holyrood and Westminster in recent weeks and months. Now, physician associate and anaesthesia associates are well on their way to becoming regulated by the General Medical Council. We will continue to work as part of the medical team, led and supervised by doctors, working closely with nurses, paramedics and other professions involved in the delivery of vital care, and in turn contributing to the development and training of others within the team. We need to see change urgently across the border NHS, here in Scotland and further afield. A Labour government this year will begin to make that happen, for the sake of patients, healthcare workers and the NHS itself. We need to see real workforce planning and real investment in the healthcare team. And I, for one, am very much looking forward to being part of that healthcare team under a Labour government. I move.
So I understand that motion has been moved from the floor. Yes, excellent. So motion now call on the mover of motion 15, which is on improving oral health.
Conference, Dave Watson, Socialist Health Association, Scotland, moving motion 15 on improving oral health. Now, few of us relish a trip to the dentist, even if it's perhaps slightly less stressful since the NAS gave up the profession to become a politician. It's my recurring nightmare that I go to my local dentist and NAS is there as a locum, with that ready smile of his, "Don't worry, comrade, we'll have that filling fixed in no time at all." Can I just urge the good voters of Glasgow to keep voting him in, and so that doesn't happen. So, if you're not a regular at your local dentist, You are not alone. Less than half of adult Scots are now attending an NHS dentist, down from 2/3 pre-pandemic in 2018. Even more worrying, children's access has dropped from 85% in 2018 to 66% in the latest statistics. And as with every health inequality, it's much worse in poorer communities and getting worse. It's a horrifying fact that the main reason children have an elective hospital admission and general anaesthetic is to have their rotting teeth taken out. Scotland benefits from the Child Smile programme, which was first introduced by a Labour government in 2005 and 6, recently highlighted by the World Health Association as a best practice in Europe. Good though Child Smile has been, we need to do more. Children and teenagers with dental caries have more time off school, and poor child health is also related to poor oral and general health in adulthood. Oral conditions are almost entirely preventable with the right policies and incentives. One of those policies is water fluoridation. That's adding a small amount of fluoride, pretty much as similar to you getting your toothpaste, to drinking water. A process recommended by all the UK chief medical officers and the World Health Organization. Not only is fluoridation effective at reducing pain, misery and disfigurement, it can also cut NHS costs. For every £1 spent on fluoridation, particularly in deprived areas, it can secure savings of over £12 after 5 years and nearly £22 after 10 years. It's not a replacement for Child Smile, it should be additional. Now, some people argue that this is mass medication, messing about with our pure Scottish water. These folk have a romantic notion that our water supply travels from the hills down through the burns into reservoirs and then our taps untreated. Well, we used to do that until our Victorian forebearers realised this practice killed thousands of people in cities like Glasgow, and so installed treatment works and add chemicals to the water. Oh, and for those who quote the McColl case against Labour's Strathclyde Regional Council, that case was decided on a narrow point of legal process, not on the question of medication. In fact, the judge rejected all the medical arguments against fluoridation. And the sensible Scottish public has also come out strongly in favour. For those who gave an opinion in a recent survey, 88% favoured adding fluoride to water, with only 12% against. If you want to read more about fluoridation, you can download a briefing from the Socialist Health Association of Scotland website, which explains it and the process in more detail. Now, for conference for adults as well as children, access to an NHS dentist is a vital part of prevention, as well as treatment. We now have the lowest number of NHS dentists since 2011. Dental practice is increasingly likely to be taken over by a corporation more interested in the bottom line than your teeth. We need a new workforce plan to reverse this decline, and if the private sector won't deliver NHS care, then health boards should be stepping in by expanding the salaried public dental service. Government has effectively allowed private practice to regulate itself and the dental body corporates to expand uncontrollably. This has to stop. Nobody would allow it. In fact, it would be unlawful to allow it in GP practices. Neither should we allow it in dentistry. Conference NHS dentistry needs more than cosmetic treatment. It needs root and branch reform and a refreshed preventative strategy. Dentistry is a public service based on prevention from an early age and treatment from all. The public health case for fluoridation, which I accept may be a new argument to many of you, is overwhelming. There's virtually no sensible opinion opposed to it. But we do accept that more work is needed on communicating that, the political messaging, if you like, to go with the public health messaging. So that's why we agreed to remit the motion. But we do so as a start to Scottish Labour taking its part in that communication process. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for this? No, so it's from... Oh.
Conference, Willie Docherty, Unison Scotland. We know this motion's been remitted, but we still wanted to just make a few points. Conference, the statistics are damning. It's unarguable that the poorer you are, the more difficult it is to get access to a dentist. You have the figures in front of you. In March 2022, dental access was 44% in the most deprived areas and 63% in the least deprived areas. That is failure. However, the Scottish Government won't acknowledge that it's failure. What they do is say that things are better than in England. We shouldn't let them away with that. The fact that someone is failing worse than they are does not mean that the Scottish Government are not failures. It's not acceptable to say to people in Bridgeton that it's worse in Bristol. That does nothing to improve the health of people in Scotland. And while the motion is about oral health impacts on health as a whole. It's associated with long-term chronic conditions like heart disease. Being poor is bad for you, and a lack of access to dentistry just compounds all of the factors that drive poorer health. We can do better, and we need to do better.
Okay, so thank you for that. The last motion to be moved is motion 16 on NHS waiting times.
Thank you, Conference. Michelle McGinn, Tatum Barton, CLP, moving motion 16 on NHS waiting times. I know that some things have moved on since this motion was first submitted, such as the Cabinet Secretary, but the figures are still as shocking as ever. These figures reaffirm the knowledge that the Scottish Government are failing to address the crisis facing this NHS. Conference, it is our friends and family who are suffering as a result of this. There is a record 828,000 people currently on an NHS waiting list. That is 1 in 6 Scottish people who are suffering for longer than they have to. We're hearing heartbreaking stories of patients who are passing away before they've even had the chance to be treated. We are seeing rising numbers of people on our waiting lists, fewer operations being carried out, and longer waits before patients are being treated. That is not what the Scottish Government promised us. In July 2022, the Scottish Government announced new targets that they promised would eradicate waits of over 2 years by August 2022, of over 18 months by December 2022, and over a year by March 2023. None of these targets have been met nearly 2 years later. The SNP are failing our NHS, they're failing our staff, and they're failing the people of Scotland at a time when we rely on them the most. But behind every one of these statistics is a person. It's a person who is suffering and a family who are unable to help them. I know every single person in this room will have their own personal story of how they and their families have been affected by delays. Whether it's delays where people are seeing these are delays where people are seeing their health decline even further. It's delays where children are waiting years for CAMHS assessment, despite meeting time treatment guarantees because they've received an initial phone call. Delays where people have used their life savings to pay for private treatment because they can no longer live with the pain they are suffering. And one that's especially close to my heart is delays in the testing and treatment of cancer that put lives at risk. And I'm very aware of this because 6 years ago I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. But from diagnosis to surgery, I was less than 6 months. Very recently, my daughter was told that she had an abnormal smear test and required a colposcopy. We're now sitting 6 months later and she's still not been seen, despite being told that she's high risk because of family history. This is not good. This should not be happening in this day and age in Scotland. We need to put pressure on the Scottish Government to ensure that time treatment guarantees are stood by, and we need to ensure that waiting times are eradicated. That's why I ask Conference to support this motion and Scottish Labour's commitment to increasing capacity, driving down our waiting times and ending the suffering of our loved ones who are living in pain. I move this motion.
So thank you for that. I hopefully I speak on behalf of us all when I say we wish your daughter the very best, the very best. So thank you for all the colleagues who moved and seconded those motions. So we can now move on to contributions from the floor. And I have been having some criticism because there's not enough female speakers coming up. So I would strongly encourage any female speakers who are tempted to come forward. And as I say that, there's two men who have put their hands up. So you want to come forward, and you as well. Go for it, yeah.
Conference, good afternoon. Zubir Ahmed, parliamentary candidate for Glasgow South West and a surgeon working in our NHS. Conference, I want to start off by paying tribute to my NHS colleagues because they worked hard, bloody hard, during COVID. And while the Tories were partying in Downing Street, they did their duty. When the SNP were spinning the COVID pandemic for political gain, they were doing their duty. And now, when the SNP are willfully neglecting our health service, my colleagues are still doing their duty, working, it seems, ever harder every day just to stand still. We've already heard today about how our health service is being stealth privatised by this SNP administration. It sounds like they've pretty much given up on the health service and filed it in the too hard to do filing cabinet. But Conference, we as a Labour Party will never give up on our health service. We will make sure that its founding principles are once again realised. Like in 1945, when we grasped the nettle and created the health service, it will be down to a 2024 UK Labour and a 2026 Scottish Labour government to rebirth our national health service. And let me tell you this, many of my NHS colleagues are simply clinging on for such a government that will allow them the headspace to once again utilise their skills to deliver the quality of care that they crave to deliver, to give them the headspace to treat patients like they would wish to be treated themselves, and to create hope that the NHS can once again become a beacon to the world. And to do all of this, they're increasingly turning to Dame Jackie Baillie as our next Scottish Health Secretary to deliver on that hope. Because while the SNP are playing on their iPads, it is Dame Jackie's competence and her mastery of her brief that is impressing NHS patients, clinicians and staff alike in the health service. From trying to secure neonatal services in Lanarkshire to shining a light on NHS board failures, it's often Dame Jackie that seems to be the only adult in the room as far as they're concerned. So friends, let us be under no illusion. The task to reform our health service is absolutely gargantuan. But as a Labour Party, it is our calling. So let's answer that call on behalf of the Scottish people together. Thank you very much.
I'm Ryan Smart, the Kirkcaldy CLP delegate and first-time speaker. I would like to speak in support of Composite Motion 7. I'm lucky enough to be a residential childcare manager with Fife Council, and since the age of 16 I've worked in community work and social care. So having spent 15 years in the industry, on the front line, I know how things have gone from bad to worse regarding the recruitment of staff in the sector. In my service, my staff are fortunate enough that their jobs are on a higher end of the scale and get at least £15 an hour. And the reason that they've had this is due to their hard work and the input for the trade unions. However, decent pay is crucial, but is only part of the issue facing recruitment of staff in this sector. One of mine and my colleagues' biggest areas of offence are that care workers are regarded as low-skilled workers. How inaccurate can that statement be, low-skilled workers? Indeed, these jobs are still seen as being for pupils at school who don't do well in exams. I worked with a young person who was likely to fail the vast majority of her exams and was told by a guidance teacher, "Don't worry, you can work in care." Like this was some sort of participation medal other than a valued career that people would want to be in. My team have to gain a HNC and an SVQ3 to be able to do their job. And not only that, but they need to do it within 3 years if their employment is required by their SSSC registration while doing a full-time job and working shifts. Apparently, these are low-skilled workers. There are carers today supporting families and individuals with end-of-life care. Apparently, these are low-skilled workers. There are carers working with adults with complex needs who will be assaulted on their shift and will go back to their work again tomorrow. Apparently, these are low-skilled workers. There are carers today that are meant to finish their shift at 12 o'clock but will continue late into the hours this evening to provide essential care that individual needs before they go home because there's no one there to relieve them. Apparently, these are low-skilled workers. So for me, the next Labour government must remember that not only is that pay shows respect, but remember that these aren't low-skilled workers, but high-skilled jobs. Thank you, Conference.
Do we have any? So, and then Paul. Is there anyone else? Oh, we've got a woman. Excellent. Come on.
Good afternoon. Oliver Thomas from the Edinburgh Northern and Leith CLP, and first time speaking at conference. I'm an NHS junior doctor in Edinburgh, and I've been a junior doctor for 10 years, and I absolutely love my job. It's the most enormous privilege getting to care for people at some of the hardest and darkest times of their lives. And I'm hardly unique. Our NHS in Scotland is staffed by tens of thousands of the most hard-working, dedicated, passionate people. But providing the care that our patients deserve is harder than it should be. Winter is always tough, and I've just spent this winter working in the medical receiving unit of an acute hospital. It has been absolutely heartbreaking seeing patients who've had no choice but to come to an acute hospital because our community and primary care services are stretched beyond breaking point. Patients who haven't been able to get appointments with their GPs and with their dentists, patients with the complications of conditions that they are on long waiting lists to get sorted, and patients who are ready for discharge home but are stuck in hospital, away from home, away from their families, because of a lack of capacity in our care homes and in domiciliary support. And I've seen firsthand through this winter and at all times the knock-on effects that has across our system. Overwhelmed emergency departments, the normalisation of long bed waits, and staff stretched beyond breaking point, trying to provide care for more patients than they realistically or safely can. It's not just a matter of more money and more funding and more staffing, as nice as all of that would be. It's about recognising the interconnectedness of our complex health system. Acute hospitals are important, but they're not the only or by any means the best place for all care to be delivered. They are, though, the canaries in the coal mine. And every patient who ends up in an acute hospital when they could have been cared for elsewhere is an opportunity missed. We can patch them up, we can send them back out, but without the right support in the community, they'll be back. The Labour Party can be rightly proud of its role in setting up our NHS, free at the point of need for all of those who need us. But for our NHS to be fit for the next 75 years, we need a government that recognises the importance of social care, of health promotion, of mental health services, of embedding services in the community and treating people at home. We need a government that will keep our NHS public and will do whatever it takes to support and to retain the incredible staff in all parts of our system. This is why I vote Labour and why I will be voting Labour for our NHS. And so I urge delegates to support the motions today that really clearly send a message that this is what we stand for. Thank you.
Rosalind Garton, Chair of Fife North East CLP. We don't have much of a chance of getting our candidates in, but we do a great job in supporting our nearest marginals. This is really for Jackie. I want to share with you a monologue that I listened to from a senior physiotherapist in a hospital in East Fife. We should be proud in Britain that one of our biggest exports is higher education. If you educate a student from overseas, you have a friend for life. But some of you may have picked up issues recently about concerns of some universities being accused of taking overseas students as opposed to home students because they get more money. What this physiotherapist was saying to me, Jackie, was that in the last 5 years, she reckons that about 80% of the placements of trainee physiotherapists that come to her hospital come from overseas. Fine. They then go home to practice. They don't train here to practice here. She said the issue here is one we need to be discussing the issues of higher education here, the people we train and the people who stay here. At the moment, certainly in East Fife, the waiting list to see a physiotherapist, she told me, is 30 weeks. I'll leave you with that one, Jackie. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Conference, and with all due respect to Councillor Arthur and the Chair, it is great to have our party conference back in the greatest city in the world and on the banks of the Clyde, and indeed it is a tremendous honour to have been able to have the privilege to represent the people of this great city in both our parliaments over the last 7 years, and indeed it's been an honour to have joined the health team in Scottish Labour. Indeed, it's been just over a year since I was appointed by Jackie Baillie, I would say, as our Shadow Minister for Mental Health. And in that time, and as we've heard in this afternoon's motions, Scotland is in the grip of a health crisis. Patients can't access the care that they need when they need it, and our workers are not getting the support that they need to stay well and to do their jobs safely. Unfortunately, the whole system is broken, and this is starkly clear to us today, most of all in mental health. Patients in some health boards in Scotland are waiting over 1,000 days to start psychological therapy. 1 in 4 consultant psychiatry roles in Scotland today are vacant. And last year, an average of 26 children a day were turned away from child and adolescent mental health services. A disgrace on this Scottish Government's record. Unfortunately, it is abundantly clear why people have simply lost faith in mental health services in Scotland. Our party believes that mental health should be treated in parity with physical health. Indeed, there is not one without the other. That is why Labour believes that people should be able to access the support they need for mild and moderate mental health issues through primary care when they need it. Labour wants to give primary care teams in Scotland the tools that they need to build that capacity and provide those support services, because by giving people that timely local access to the help they need, we can help prevent mental ill health from deteriorating, alleviating further demands on secondary services, and tackle the unacceptably long waits faced by patients. We are committed to working with those patients, with clinicians and our trade unions to create a plan which would give people the right to mental health support under a Labour government in Scotland. Conference, another element of our health service which needs our urgent attention is dentistry. As we heard, Today, more than half of Scots can't even get registered with dentists in their local area, and some are driving for miles to access NHS dentistry. Patients in some health boards are waiting up to a year in severe pain to access urgent dental treatment, so much for it being urgent. And NHS 24 calls about dental health exceeded 60,000 in 2022. That is an increase of over 40,000 in the last 4 years. We talked about canaries in coal mines. That is certainly one of them. A lack of access is leading to longer waits between checkups that were normally routine every 6 months, causing people to present later with more complex oral health issues and deepening health inequalities. And this government then wonders why the cost pressures on the NHS have increased. The people of Scotland need a fully functioning dental service which is accessible for all and works for both patients and dentists. Our colleagues down south have set out their plan to rescue the NHS dentistry system, which includes increasing capacity for 700,000 more urgent appointments and offering incentives for dentists to work in areas with the greatest need. We are committed to working with patients and dentists on a similar plan for dentistry here in Scotland, which eradicates the current postcode lottery of dental care. And building on the success of Scottish Labour's Child Smell programme, introduced by Scottish Labour ministers in 2006, one of the greatest public health interventions of the devolved era, we will continue to work to improve children's oral health, and our party will put prevention at the centre of our efforts to rescue NHS's dentistry system. Scotland's health service can be rebuilt, but it needs change to do so, and Scottish Labour in government will be that change.
Okay, and thank you for Paul. I think this has actually been a really good session, actually. The depth and the breadth of the debates has been really good. And I think it's been helped by the fact we've had so many people from the care sector actually contributing to the debate. So absolutely fantastic. So can I now call on Callum Mochan, MSP, Shadow Minister for Public Health and Women's Health, to close this debate. There she is.
Thank you, Conference. Let me begin today by reflecting on the excellent debate we have just had. It was thought-provoking and heartening in equal measures. Can I turn to today's excellent motions and thank all the contributions and speakers from the floor and assure you that the health team were listening. Can I just say regarding the motion on improving oral health, motion number 15, we think this is an excellent motion and we want to consider it further, and so we do thank the mover for remitting this motion to Scottish Policy Forum. And can I gladly ask Conference to support the remaining motions in this debate. Conference, listening to the contributions of members, delegates and other speakers, it could not be clearer that your experiences and those of the people of Scotland, despite the tremendous efforts of our staff, our NHS is under extreme pressure. It is struggling because it has been under-resourced for too long and it has been woefully mismanaged by this SNP government. For our NHS to continue to meet its founding principles, things must change, and under Labour they will. It has been extremely positive to see the determination within this room to get our NHS back on its feet, to deliver a service fit for the future, ready to meet the needs of the Scottish people. And let me assure you that same determination exists in Parliament too. Jackie, Paul and I will work tirelessly to speak up for the service that means so much to so many. Whether it's Humza Yousaf, Michael Matheson or now Neil Gray, it's more of the same. Talk is cheap and we need action. The SNP has run our health service into the ground and now their focus is on their own internal issues and the detriment of the Scottish people. Conference, they do not stand up for Scotland
They stand in the way of Scotland. The Labour Party built our NHS, and it will be the Labour Party that rebuilds this. In women's health, we will tackle inequalities in cancer screening to ensure a woman's postcode does not define her health outcomes. And we will be relentlessly focused on cutting waiting times related to women's health. After Scottish Labour research found that under the SNP, the longest current wait for a hysterectomy is just short of 4 years. And I'm going to say that again, 4 years. That should shock each and every one of us. And it only confirms what we already know, that the SNP is failing women. And they are letting down women working in the health service too. Safe staffing not yet implemented 5 years on. Equally safe at work accreditation not delivered in a single health board. And women in low-paid jobs in our health service being put under extreme pressure to make ends meet. Comrades, we need Labour's new deal for working people now more than ever to improve pay, terms and conditions for our female workforce, and I am delighted that the next Labour government will do just that. For improved women's health outcomes, things must change, Conference, and under Labour they will change. In public health, we will fight to reduce health inequalities that become deeper and more divisive by the day. They are a stain on our society. They hold people and communities back, and they have no place in modern Scotland. And Conference, it is my ambition to see them eradicated once and for all. Conference, we will properly support alcohol and drug partnerships to work in our poorest communities, and we will ensure that any profits large retailers make from minimum unit pricing will be recouped and invested in public health-focused policies. Conference, we know more than most that there are few things more important than the health of our nation. Whilst the SNP has an increasingly distant relationship with delivery, be assured that the Labour Party will get to work and continue its record of positive action taken in the interests of the health of our nation and for the future of our National Health Service. For the improved health of our population, things must change. Conference, and under Scottish Labour, they will change. Conference, when we meet next year, I hope that we'll be looking back at electoral success and looking forward to fighting for every vote so that we can deliver more. The Labour Party is nothing if it is not a champion of public service. And I am delighted that we have such a positive and ambitious agenda seen here today to deliver the change our health service needs. We must fight as though our NHS depends on it, because it does. Only Labour can, and only Labour will deliver the change our NHS needs, the change our patients and staff need, and the change our country needs. Let us all work together and deliver that change. Thank you, Conference.
Okay, thank you for that, Carol. A rousing end to this session. We just have a small matter of the votes to go through for the motions presented. So the SEC supports all the motions as presented. So we just want to do a quick vote by call of hands in the first instance to see if we can approve these. So the first was composite motion 6 on the National Care Service. If you support this motion, can you please raise your hands, delegates? Anyone against? Okay, thank you. Composite motion 7 on NHS and social care workforce. Can those in favour raise their hands? Those against? Excellent. Motion 12 on neonatal services. If you're in favour, raise your hands. Those against? Okay. Motion 13 on NHS workforce planning. Those in favour, raise your hands. Somebody had their hand up before I even asked there. Those against? Excellent. Motion 14 was withdrawn. Motion 15 has been remitted, as you heard. Motion 16, the last one, is on NHS waiting times. Those in favour, raise their hands. Anyone against reducing waiting times in NHS? Okay, we're okay then. Okay, all approved. Thank you very much. That was a good session. Now, quickly, we're going to move on to the next session, which is the change we need for stronger and safer communities. And these motions are, of course, the text is available in your pack and the CEC report. We'll consider the following motions. Motion 8 on sub-postmasters from Greenock and Inverclyde CLP and Paisley CLP. Motion 9 on the housing emergency by Dundee City West CLP, Edinburgh Northern Leith CLP, Scottish Labour Students and Adrian Shotts CLP. Composite Motion 10 on women's rights submitted by Rutherglen CLP and Scottish Labour's Women Conference, initially proposed by Edinburgh Southern CLP. Motion 17 on rural services by Perth and Kinross CLP. Motion 18 on assaults in the justice sector, submitted by Community Union, and I think that's our first so far in this conference. And Motion 19 on public service funding, submitted by Scottish Young Labour, and Emergency Motion 2 on a fair deal for local government workers and services. Have I got that right? Is that? Right, so both 19 and motion. So both motion 19 and the emergency motion will be considered within the context of a statement which is made on behalf of the SEC by Joe Baxter, and the text for that should have been circulated. And I think the text is actually quite good and something I'll be sharing on my social media later. So, can I ask that delegates are ready to move and second those motions? Oh, sorry, apologies. I'm getting, in my haste, I've missed out motion 20, which is actually really important, on safer politics, submitted by Falkirk West CLP. So, can I ask if the movers and seconders are ready? But first, to open this debate, we have Pauline McNeill, MSP, Shadow Cabinet Secretary for Justice.
Thank you. Conference, the change our communities need is to have real confidence in our criminal justice system and its institutions. Scotland's communities want to feel safe in their day-to-day lives with strong public services. But in 15 years of government, the SNP have not driven the change that has given communities the confidence that they demand. But now is the time to transform the way victims of crime are treated in our outdated justice system. We can no longer tolerate victims feeling as though they are remote from a court system, with practices that leave them feeling that their voice is not heard, and when they have been brave enough to have reported a crime in the first place. Conference, this is a time when the number of sexual crimes recorded is soaring, and in a third of those crimes, the victims were children. So that's why the Labour Justice team are clear that in the Victim and Witnesses Bill going through the Scottish Parliament, that we will support change that will make a difference to make the reality of the experience of victims on the ground. A single point of contact, independent legal advocacy for victims of rape, and dispensing with some of the outdated court practices that make victims feel that they are on trial would be a good start. Myself and Katie Clark and the Justice team would like to thank the CLPs and the unions who took part in our consultation on violence against women and girls, but particularly the Scottish Women's Committee for the incredible session at their annual conference. All participants agreed that radical change is needed in our society on men's violence towards women and girls. So we demand change for women, but we demand it from men. At a recent inquiry by the UK Parliament's Women and Equalities Committee, they heard how easy access to pornography has completely changed the culture in the playground, and it's having a corrosive impact within schools. Tales of boys cyber flashing hardcore pornographic images at girls in the corridor and airdropping nude images to other students in class conference. Cyber flashing unwanted images to women and girls is a crime. So, conference, we need to stand up for the new generation of women and girls, and the only way to change the situation is to bring boys into the conversation and include them as part of the solution. And so Scottish Labour will focus on programmes that engage and educate boys in order to tackle this issue. Scottish Labour values its police officers, its fire and rescue workers and its prison service workers who do a very hard job on the front line, keeping Scotland's communities safe. But it is becoming more difficult by the day as police and fire budgets are being slashed by the SNP. Our prison system is on the brink of collapse. It is severely overcrowded, and Scotland has one of the highest remand populations in Europe and one of the highest deaths in custody. The prison estate is crumbling, and many areas are unsafe for prisoners and staff. It is a disgrace, conference, that in 15 years of SNP government, that Scotland's prison system still has no viable alternatives to custody. We are locking up far too many people in cells, in fact, for 23 hours a day in some cases, with shockingly poor mental health services. What happens in our prisons matters, as Kate Wallace of Victim Support Scotland says, that rehabilitation of criminals is fundamental to reducing future crime. And this is not how a modern Scotland looks, and it needs to change. But conference, too many lives have been lost in prison, where the state has a duty to keep prisoners safe. The Katie Allen family have been exemplar in exposing the failings of how young people are looked after in custody and the appalling circumstances of William Lindsay Brown, who died on remand in Polmont Prison. He should never have been in prison in the first place. He was a child and he should have been in secure accommodation. Scottish Labour will take action to ensure families have a line of communication if they are concerned about their families' members' welfare to prevent more deaths in prison. Scotland needs a criminal justice system that not only looks accountable but is accountable. It serves democracy well to question established institutions because sometimes they get things wrong. Worse, attempt to cover up wrongdoing. Politicians and government officials should be more open to interrogating big institutions where there is a groundswell of evidence that something has gone wrong. The circumstances surrounding the death of Alan Marshall, who died in HMP Edinburgh on remand after being restrained at different times by 17 prison officers, leaves a stain on our justice system. The officers were wrongly given immunity for life from prosecution, but thanks to the tireless work of the families, there may yet be justice for Alan, as our Lord Advocate has made a historic decision to order Police Scotland to investigate corporate homicide of the prison service. But without these brave families and individuals, there would not be justice. And if there was ever an example of where institutions were taken at their word, it is the Post Office Horizon scandal. It is not only one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in recent times, but it is one of the biggest cover-ups. Conference, we must never allow this to happen again, because over 700 people across the UK, with at least 60 in Scotland, may have been wrongly convicted based on the Post Office's flawed IT systems, which they repeatedly stood by. And whilst people were jailed, many had their lives destroyed. It is these families and individuals like Alan Bates who questioned institutions and held them to account, and we owe them change. The Post Office was a trusted institution which had the powers in England and Wales not only to investigate but to prosecute cases. And in Scotland, only the Crown can prosecute. This should have prevented miscarriages of justice, but the Crown Office relied too heavily on the Post Office's evidence, and it's clear that the Post Office cannot be trusted again. Conference has said that our communities need to feel safe, but they will not feel safe unless police officers are visible, patrolling our streets and able to carry out basic policing duties. But since 2013, over 1,000 police officers have been lost from the service, and that figure is set to worsen. Police station closures are unprecedented, and the latest round suggests a possible closure of 29 across Scotland due to budget cuts. The SNP government have slashed the police budget, and this is despite Police Scotland returning £200 million in efficiency savings over 10 years since the creation of the single police force. Police officers are leaving in their droves. We're asking too much of our police officers with too little. Is it any wonder that police officers are leaving, not just to take early retirement, but to follow other careers? We need a modern vision for policing in the 21st century, and that includes body-worn cameras for every single officer in Police Scotland, the only force not to have cameras at their disposal. Policing is the last and only public service required to deal with people with a mental health crisis, and thousands of police hours are lost. With officers sitting in A&E, we need a change in the system to free up police hours, to tackle serious crime and antisocial behaviour, and give our communities back the visibility of the police that they deserve. The Scottish Labour Party will value our prisons, our police service, but we will also equally value our fire and rescue service. Katie Clark and I, Shadow Minister for Community Services, have been working alongside the Fire Brigade Union and their campaign to stop the closure of fire stations. Many of you have been involved in this campaign. It's been a tremendous campaign, not only because Katie and I were able to go on an actual fire engine and make speeches, but because those men and women put themselves on the line, not to fight for themselves, but to fight for the fire and rescue service as a whole. We need a modern reform. We need modern reform to our fire and rescue services that faces serious challenges. Conference Scottish Labour has a vision for vital public services in a modern Scotland. We have a strong grasp of the problems and the challenges that our country faces. Conference, I look forward to this debate. We have a lot to do. We need change in our country. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Pauline, and for all you do. So I want to move on to moving the motions now. So can I invite, so as previously, the movers have 5 minutes, seconders have 3, and then contributions from the floor of 3 as well. So the first, do we have the mover for motion 8 on sub-postmasters? Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Marcus Barry, Greenock and Inverclyde CLP, moving composite 8 on the sub-postmasters. Conference, this is no ordinary scandal. It's a bigger scandal than 2 ferries languishing in Port Glasgow. It's a bigger scandal than the missing £600,000 from someone's bank account. And it's an even bigger scandal than political leaders partying in lockdown in 10 Downing Street. This scandal is more serious than all of these because it wasn't just about money or incompetence or bad behaviour. This scandal was quite simply the greatest miscarriage of justice in British history. Hundreds of innocent men and women were made bankrupt, made homeless, made to question reality itself. And tragically, Conference, as we know, some felt they could no longer go on living due to the pressure the Post Office put them through. Not forgetting, Conference, that the sub-postmaster victims were all hard-working men and women. They were the heart of their community, trusted by their customers. They were and are the salt of the earth. In essence, they were the epitome of the traditional working class that this government shamefully ignores. And there's no problem identifying who is responsible. It starts with those at Fujitsu, who introduced the faulty Horizon software and looked to cover their tracks when they knew it was flawed. Then we move on to the Post Office managers, who decided to chase their employees for losses that they knew were falsely generated by that software. They continued to lie to them, telling each of them that they were the only one. At no point did any Post Office manager speak out. They were so desperate to cover their own backs that they went ahead with prosecutions, continued to lie in court, and were even willing to see their own innocent workers sent to jail. But Conference, as ever, this ends up with politicians. The doubts about Horizon software were first brought to light by Computer Weekly and Private Eye 15 years ago. Many government ministers responsible for the Post Office have come and gone, and they all failed to act. They even failed to meet the victims leading the campaign. As a result of this ministerial incompetence, many victims are still waiting in a legal limbo, unable to move on with their lives. Conference, we are calling for justice. Justice for all the sub-postmasters caught up in this scandal, with an immediate and full pardon and full and unconditional compensation. But Conference, that would be only the start, because so far not a single Post Office manager has been held to account. Not a single one has resigned. And not a single one has been charged with an offence. A criminal investigation into their activities must be instigated. So, Conference, there is more than enough fault to go around. The Fujitsu Corporation, Post Office managers, government ministers. But it's the innocent sub-postmasters who are the victims. They are the victims of corporate greed. They are the victims of callous management. They are the victims of a political class out of touch with ordinary, hard-working men and women. Conference, solidarity with the sub-postmasters. Please support this motion. I move.
Good afternoon, Conference. My name is Ben Smith, Councillor for Paisley North West, and I'll be seconding this motion on behalf of Paisley CLP. Conference, service and the chance to serve are ideals we value as the Labour Party. And service is exactly what sub-postmasters tirelessly give to their communities across the UK. And in return for their service, more than 700 sub-postmasters were wrongfully convicted of fraud or theft. These innocent people and their families reached out for help to clear their names and were squashed by a system which at best wanted the sub-postmasters silenced and forgotten, and at worst wanted them wrongfully imprisoned. Like the Hillsborough families, the women who were victim of mesh implants here in Scotland, the striking miners and their families, and the victims of the blood transfusion scandal, the Post Office scandal Horizon victims were disbelieved, ignored, vilified, lied to and let down by governments and society. In conference, one of the darkest marks on the soul of our society is that many of the wrongly convicted sub-postmasters and many of their family members have died without the faintest trace of justice. As our motion says, the prosecution of the sub-postmasters by the Post Office and by the Crown Office here in Scotland is one of the worst miscarriages of justice in our country's history. And who knows if any of the sub-postmasters would even have the hope of justice and compensation without ITV's programme. Frankly, Conference, we might be late to this particular fight, but if the party we all support stands for any of the ideals and values that we hold dear, we have a moral obligation to stand shoulder to shoulder with the sub-postmasters and their families until they have received adequate compensation and have had their convictions quashed. And most importantly, Conference, if and when the Labour Party returns to government in Westminster and Holyrood, we must build up society to ensure that this can never happen again. We must build up a society that listens to the victims of injustice and not to those who perpetrate it. A society that values and respects those who serve all our communities across the UK. Conference, that is what we must do if we are given the chance to serve again. I hope we can all support this motion. Thank you.
And the mover of motion 9 on the housing emergency? Excellent.
Hello, my name is Callum Mulholland, Dundee CLP, and I'm here today moving composite motion 9 regarding the issue of the housing emergency in Scotland. As a student in Dundee, I know how important it is to have the option of affordable housing. Conference. In recent months and recent years, we've all seen the build-up to this housing crisis that is now facing Scotland. In fact, in a recent poll by YouGov, 80% of Scots have said that Scotland was experiencing a housing crisis. Housing in Scotland is now heading towards breaking point. But don't just ask me, ask the three councils, Edinburgh City, Argyll and Bute and Glasgow City, that have all declared a housing emergency. Ask the 240,000 people on a social housing waiting list. Ask the student from St Andrews that are now being housed in Dundee due to a lack of affordable housing. Ask the 30,000 households that have now been assessed as homeless, with children in temporary accommodation, the highest it has ever been. But do not ask the Scottish Government. As far as they're concerned, no such housing crisis exists, which is why they voted against declaring a housing emergency. Good to see that the SNP's level of awareness is at an all-time high. By declaring a housing emergency, this would have signalled that the Scottish Government not only understands the seriousness of the issue, but is willing to try and solve it. Let's be honest, this crisis is mostly due to the lack of supply of affordable housing. No one can deny the impact the right to buy had on home ownership, but the success of home ownership yesterday has put a burden on many people today, especially young adults struggling to get onto the housing ladder. I mentioned earlier that 240,000 people were on social housing waiting lists. Solace Scotland estimates 125,000 affordable homes need to be built to be kept up with the current demand. This is looking unlikely, as last year the number of all-sector new-build homes completed was down 6%. The number of all-sector new-build homes started down by 25%. Hardly surprising coming from a government that decided it was in the country's best interest during a housing crisis to slash the budget for more homes by 25%. In our time of need, where are they? The Conservative Party is not any better. Where stability was needed, chaos ensued. Gambling on families' mortgages, pushing interest rates higher for longer for families desperately trying to keep a roof over their head. In the last year, households in Dundee are now paying 17% more in rent, putting more constraint on household budgeting during a cost of living crisis, a 70% increase in the last decade. This isn't even the highest increase in Scotland. But what does increasing the supply of affordable homes mean to people, to families? It means the chance of a better life, a chance for stability, a chance to improve the well-being for many in this country. The 10,000 children that are in temporary accommodation, school is hard enough without worrying about where you're going to be sleeping. It is a chance for them to live a stable life and prosper in school and for the rest of their lives. Not to mention the needy jobs that are created from building homes, and that any home that is built will be in line with our green ambitions while saving money on household energy bills. Can you imagine the economic potential that could be unlocked by doing all of this? Only the Labour Party is offering a plan out of this mess, a plan to build 1.5 million homes, a plan to create the next generation of new towns, a plan to reduce the amount of empty and derelict houses. Housing affects everyone in Scotland, and the people of Scotland deserve the right to a stable life and a place that they can call home. Thank you.
Conference. Solomon Cuthbertson, Chair of Scottish Labour Students, second in composite motion 9 on the housing emergency. Conference, it's an undeniable fact that Scotland is gripped by a housing emergency. Across the country, people are struggling to either find somewhere to call home or pay the rent. Unsurprisingly, the SNP and Greens have gone for the usual coping mechanism when confronted with uncomfortable truths and have again buried their heads in the sand, pretending everything's okay. Whilst the housing emergency affects people of all ages and all walks of life in Scotland, as Callan just so well described, I want to speak to one group of people who have felt the brunt of this broken housing market, even before this particular housing emergency reared its head: Scotland's students and its young people. Students are treated as second-class tenants here in Scotland. We pay more, we get less, are regularly exploited by accommodation providers, and then to top it all off, we're blamed for housing shortages. The housing market for students is dominated by private, purpose-built student accommodation, an industry that is increasingly catering to international students and the typically large budgets and their luxury student accommodation offerings. Simply unaffordable. If you're lucky enough to be able to find private accommodation that's not PBSA, you'll be treated to private landlords who do little to rectify chronic problems like pests and black mould and decaying housing stock, and who see students as little more as cash cows. Whereas Dundee has seen its average rent rise by 17%, and in Edinburgh the rent has risen by 18.4%, both completely shocking. A student's typical rent in Scotland has risen by 34%. That is in contrast with student maintenance that has hardly risen at all. In the face of this, as I say, student maintenance has remained painfully stagnant, not reflecting the cost of living crisis affecting so many, or the extortionate increases to our rents. Students are having to spend more of their time behind the bar rather than in the library, simply to pay the rent or put food on the table. With the context of these extortionate rents and exploitative contracts, it's unsurprising and yet still utterly shameful that 12% of Scotland's students have gone through homelessness during their studies. Speaking from personal experience, I know how precarious housing is for students. I found myself at the end of a semester not knowing if I would have somewhere to live and ended up having to spend a summer couch surfing. Unfortunately, Conference, once we graduate, our prospect of housing little improves. The prospect of home ownership for young people in Scotland is a very distant dream. Scottish Labour is already leading the way in calling for a declaration of a housing emergency, and I applaud the work of our hard-working MSPs and councillors across the country in holding the Scottish Government to account for their failings. No matter the SNP and Greens' deflections, the reality is that Scotland is gripped by the housing emergency, and we need the ambition of a Scottish Labour Government to be able to escape it. Please support Composite Motion 9.
Thank you for that, Solomon. And the next mover is for Composite Motion 10 on women's rights.
Hi, Laura Bird, Scottish Labour Women's Committee and Edinburgh Southern CLP. Composite Motion 10 is a composite of a motion sent from Scottish Women's Conference last November, plus a motion from Rutherglen CLP. The motion celebrates Labour's undoubted, long, historic commitment to women's rights. It also seeks to reaffirm women's sex-based rights as a Scottish Labour principle. Sometimes women's rights can be framed as the absence of violence or abuse. But women's rights should be part of our everyday life and should also encompass dignity, privacy and fairness. I will give you 3 out of many, many examples where safety, dignity, privacy and fairness matter to women. Breast cancer is the most common cancer in Britain. It is the biggest single killer of women aged 35 to 65 and the second most lethal cancer for women overall. So it really is worth getting checked, which means a mammogram. Having a mammogram is pretty undignified, and women of a certain age in the hall all know what I'm talking about. You are alone in a room with a stranger, topless, who's handling your breasts and squashing each one into a clamp. I am pleased to say that for now, NHS Lothian guarantees that that stranger will be another woman, and long may that commitment to safety, privacy and dignity continue. A second, more unusual example where this matters is in the criminal justice system, which sees women and men at their lowest ebb. Women bearing witness for the prosecution, women in prison, women pulling their life back together after a terrifying attack. Thanks to Joanne Lamont and the Scottish Labour Party, women who have been raped and have an internal examination to look for evidence, and you know what I mean by that, can insist that a female nurse takes the swabs. But at the same time, under the SNP government, a woman who has experienced sexual assault, a woman going crazy with rumination round and round in her head, cannot be assured of speaking with a woman counsellor about her experiences. A third area where safety, dignity and fairness matter is in sport. Women have certain physiological disadvantages to men in most sports. My teenage daughter loves training and playing with her grassroots girls' football team. She enjoys the camaraderie, she enjoys physical exhilaration in the fresh air, and she enjoys the mental problem solving of playing in a team. But if she finds that she has to compete with and be tackled by boys, she just won't play. There will never be equality of outcome between men and women on the football pitch, but there can be equality of opportunity. Carving out space for female sports is fundamental to women and girls' participation. The last Labour government produced the Equality Act, which attempts to enshrine when discrimination is illegal and when it is legal. Sometimes, for reasons described above, discrimination is the appropriate course of action in order to uphold safety, dignity, privacy and fairness. Scottish Labour Women's Conference discussed the matter of women's sex-based rights in a calm and respectful manner last November, and it is encouraging to see that the leadership have committed more resource for the Scottish Labour Women's Committee. This will hopefully create space for women's voices to be heard in the party. The principle of women's sex-based rights is a moderate one that has widespread support. Please vote in favour of Composite Motion 10.
Good afternoon, Conference. Amy Lee Frioli, Rutherglen CLP. I'm a first-time speaker and thank you. And I am seconding Composite 10. This motion today talks to the very principles of the Labour movement. Progress, equality, justice and fairness. They're common principles which I believe unite all of us. Those principles are what led the last Labour government to enact the Equality Act, one of its strongest achievements in office. It was a landmark piece of legislation that enshrined the principle of equality into law. It has, and no doubt, advanced the cause of equality here in Scotland and across the rest of the UK since. That legislation was a testament to our collective determination to break down barriers and eliminate negative discrimination. It set the stage for a more inclusive, more equitable society. But inasmuch as it has advanced equality, particularly for women, it has not eradicated it by any means. There is still much to do to confront the harsh realities that persist in our society. Violence, exploitation and discrimination against women and girls continues to plague our communities. It's incumbent on all of us, as members of the Labour movement, to confront these injustices head-on and redouble our efforts to tackle them. We must confront the systemic inequalities that perpetuate the material disadvantages faced by women and girls. We cannot turn a blind eye, nor can we shirk our responsibility to address the root causes. Conference, as women, we face this fight every day of our lives. We're always willing and ready to face it head-on. We don't need to be told it's a problem. But as Polly McNeill said in her speech, we need men to act. I want to directly address the men in our movement today. As allies in the fight for women's equality, you must act on your own responsibilities by actively challenging and pushing to dismantle the patriarchal attitudes and behaviours that perpetuate violence and discrimination. That means speaking out against misogyny, advocating for women's rights, and holding other men accountable for their actions. It is imperative that men recognise their privilege and use it to amplify the voices of women. Working hand in hand together, we can build a society founded on mutual respect and dignity. In calling upon Scottish Labour to engage in positive debate and to uphold the primacy of the Equality Act, we reaffirm our commitment to ending inequality and protecting the rights of women and girls. This means listening to diverse perspectives, encouraging inclusive dialogue, and taking concrete action to dismantle the structures of oppression that persist in our society. Together, we have the power to effect meaningful change, to build a future where every individual is afforded dignity, respect, and equal opportunity. So let us stand united, Conference, in our pursuit of justice, guided by the principles of equality and solidarity that lie at the heart of the Labour movement. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can I invite the mover of motion 17 on rural services? You're very welcome.
Hello, my name is Isla Reid from Perth and Kinross CLP, and I'm a first-time speaker. Friends, I join you from rural Perth and Kinrossshire. We have faced many of the same challenges as the Central Belt in these difficult past years of austerity. However, in many cases, the impact of cuts has disproportionately impacted those of us living in rural areas. Conference, I wanted to tell you about my friend. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah lived in a small rural village close to Kinross. She struggled to find work near where she lived and could not drive, so relied on public transport to get out of her village to find work. Isolated and feeling like she couldn't progress in a career like she had hoped and planned to, this began to negatively impact her mental health, which she already struggled with. Things became too much for Sarah, and tragically, last year, Sarah took her own life. There were many factors that contributed to Sarah's decision to end her life, but feeling so isolated and feeling like she could not progress certainly did not help. Conference, we cannot let more people like Sarah struggle. This motion calls for minimum levels of access to services in rural areas in order that those living rurally do not continue to be disproportionately impacted in the years to come. It is terrible whenever a GP practice is forced to close in an urban area. Patients may, however, now have to travel 1 or 2 miles to their next closest GP practice. However, in rural areas, the impact is felt more severely, as their next closest GP practice could now be 20 or even 30 miles away. Furthermore, workers in rural areas often have to fight absentee, short-term let landlords for housing. The lack of affordable housing in rural areas has now reached the point that families in Perth and Kinross who find themselves in housing crisis are forced to decide if they should move away from their friends, family and loved ones to find housing in the city, or face the agonising wait for social or council housing to become available. The lack of affordable housing not just hits our workers, it makes it difficult to recruit staff into some of the most important sectors of our lives, such as health and social care and the fire service. The impact is also felt economically. There are hotels in rural areas of Perth and Kinross who are now having to close down midweek or to stop offering a dinner service. This is because the staff they would love to create jobs for simply cannot afford to live in the area. We have to fix this, and we can fix this and boost our economy by giving workers in rural areas somewhere to live at a fair price to make sure no one else suffers like Sarah did. This motion establishes minimum levels of access to essential services such as housing, health and social care, education, transport and banking for those living in rural areas, and in doing so reaffirms that we as a movement will govern for all in Scotland when we are given the opportunity to serve. Thank you.
Conference, Marcus Luker, Angus South, CLP, seconding the Perth Kinross motion. And for anyone who was listening to my earlier speech, you'll be happy to know I spent my lunch properly numbering my pages. Conference, I am immensely proud to have grown up in a rural community and to continue to live there now. I am so grateful that I can enjoy limitless access to nature, clean air, and the peace and calm that only comes with village life. However, as Isla set out before me, rural living is not without its frustrations. So in this speech, I want to take you on a short journey around my home of Angus. We're going to meet some real people who I spoke to when preparing this speech. However, I have of course changed their names. Let's go first to Forfar to meet Denise. Denise is in her late 60s. She lives alone after losing her husband many years ago. In her spare time, she loves to garden and volunteer for a local charity. She lives with a chronic health condition and so has regular appointments at Nine Mills Hospital in Dundee. Because of her condition, Denise cannot drive, so she must use public transport to get around. But Denise wishes she could make use of her car, because whilst Nine Mills is just a 30-minute drive from her home, it is 90 minutes by bus. Denise therefore spends 3 hours in total travelling to attend just a half-hour appointment. Now let's travel south to the village of Wellbank to meet Liam. Liam is 15 and lives in the village with his mum. Until last September, Liam used to look forward to Friday afternoons because he could join his friends at the youth club, which was hosted in the village hall. But Liam now dreads a boring Friday spent alone at home because Angus Council can no longer afford to employ the youth workers needed to run the club. Liam's friends now go to the gym in Dundee because there is nothing else for them to do in the village. But Liam cannot join them because his mum can't afford the monthly membership. Now, conference, let's go lastly to Brecon to meet Neve. Neve is 17 and is currently studying for her higher exams. Until last October, Neve and her family used to live near the river, but following Storm Babette and the flooding it brought, Neve is now stuck living with her granny, having to share a room with her younger brother. Neve finds it impossible to study and she is falling behind her classmates. Neve is angry, scared and upset. Angry that her parents received a pittance in compensation, scared that she may never return to her childhood home, and upset that the First Minister was more interested in a carefully crafted photo op than actually supporting the residents of Brecon. Conference, it is for people like Denise, Liam, Neve and Sarah that this motion is so needed. Public services in our rural areas are on their knees and our rural citizens need to know that the Labour Party will stand by them in fighting for improvements. Now, more than ever, our rural communities need the security of minimum levels of access to services to level the playing field, to stop depopulation and to give rural Scotland a future we can be excited about. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So the next motion to be moved is motion 18, which is on assaults in the justice sector.
Afternoon conference. Steve McGutt, Community Union, moving the motion, assaults in the justice sector. Conference, the Scottish prison estate is at breaking point. Overcrowded, underfunded and overstretched. Failing the public, failing prisoners and failing to protect those who work there every day to keep us all safe. The Scottish Prison Service's own statistics show that between 2018 and 2023, there was a total of 1,780 assaults on staff working within the prison estate, an average of 356 assaults per year, meaning that almost every day a member of staff was assaulted. This comes as no surprise to our members working on the front line. At Community, we hear each and every single day about the challenges and concerns our members are facing at work. Concerns about their own safety, about the safety of their colleagues, and about the complete lack of support there is for them. Community's most recent survey showed that a quarter of all justice, custodial and immigration sector workers had been assaulted at work in 1 year alone. That's 1 in 4 members of staff assaulted. Conference, this is a completely unacceptable state of affairs. No one should ever go to work fearing for their own safety. They deserve better. And the Scottish public deserve a prison service that works. A system that protects the public, that works to stop prisoners from reoffending, and which doesn't leave dedicated staff fearing for their own safety. But the public are being failed, Conference. Failed by an SNP government which seems incapable of recognising that these issues are all connected. The overcrowding leads to increased levels of violence and assaults, which makes rehabilitation harder and reoffending more likely. Reoffending pushes people back into the system, making overcrowding even worse and compounding this destructive cycle even further. Conference, we cannot continue like this. We can't continue with an SNP government that seems more concerned with ideology than with addressing the issues facing our justice sector, more concerned with who employs the staff than ensuring their safety whilst at work. We know, for example, only a few months ago, the Scottish Government received an offer from Serco to build a state-of-the-art 300-bed facility, an offer in which the company was willing to completely cover all the costs. That's 300 extra prison places that would have eased pressure on capacity at a time when it is desperately overstretched. But SNP said no. Conference, that's not delivering for the Scottish public. That's putting dogma before delivery and party ideology before public need. We can't continue like this. Our members, the staff on the front line, can't continue like this. We ask justice and custodial staff to do one of the hardest, most dangerous jobs in society. We ask them to face danger every day in order to keep us all safe. The very least they deserve is a government which prioritises their safety, a government which invests in their safety and which doesn't leave them denied of the personal protective equipment they ought to be entitled to. So, Conference, I ask you to support this motion today, to support consistent and safe working practices for staff, to support the provision of the body-worn cameras they so desperately need, and to support Community's campaign to stamp out assaults in the justice, custodial and immigration sector. Conference, thank you.
Good afternoon. Susan Donaldson, Usdaw, seconding the motion on stamping out assaults in the justice sector on behalf of my trade union, Usdaw. Conference, unfortunately, it's all too common for unions members to face violence and abuse in their workplace. Whether working in retail, justice, healthcare or many other sectors, it is absolutely unacceptable for any worker to go to work in fear of their own safety. Usdaw stands in solidarity with all workers fighting for safe working conditions. As this motion quite rightly points out, there is a strong link between cuts and to the public sector spending and increases in violence towards our members. The more the SNP and Tory government cut, the worse the situation gets for those on the front line. We are clear that enough is enough. No more cuts at the cost of our members. I am pleased to see Community's motion outlining a clear strategy to protect their members. We know the power of trade union campaigning in tackling these issues. We know the value of technology in catching the perpetrators, and we know the need to ensure that procurement tending does not result in a race to the bottom on worker safety. This motion lays out a clear framework to ensure that members can go to work confident that they will be able to return home safely. And that is a framework which Labour must support. Speaking on behalf of USDO members, we know the value of this type of Labour support. When looking to protect retail workers, Daniel Johnson MSP helped to deliver legislation that made it a specific offence to assault a shop worker. This legislation has already led to over 500 convictions, taking criminals off streets and making our members feel safe at work. Conference, this was delivered as a result of a joint campaigning between trade unions and Labour. Something that we believe should be repeated on behalf of the prison officers. As such, please support this motion.
Thank you. Can I invite Joanna Baxter now to present the SEC statement on motion 19, public service funding?
Good afternoon, Conference. Joanna Baxter speaking to the SEC statement on public sector funding. Conference, the funding system for our local councils is broken, and the Scottish Government is treating them with complete contempt. The funding allocation for local government in the 2024-25 Scottish Budget represents a real terms cut to council budgets. £63 million cut to the revenue budget, and it follows successive years of cuts to local government by the SNP government in Holyrood. And before they tell you that that's not the case, just go to the recent IFS document published this week, which states that their own budget figures are seriously misleading in terms of the picture it paints on local government funding. And the failure of the SNP government at Holyrood to properly fund their proposed council tax freeze has left councillors across our country facing impossible decisions about where cuts fall rather than which services get the most investment. Over a decade of underfunding has seen potholes multiplying, libraries closing, bins overflowing, and preventative services that help keep pressure off our NHS severely understaffed. And shamefully, council workers, most of whom earn way below the average wage in Scotland, have been forced to take industrial action year after year just to secure a decent pay rise. Conference, when you have a government more interested in chasing a headline than lifting people off the breadline, it's our communities that suffer. It's the most vulnerable in our communities that suffer. And Shona Robertson's ultimatum to councils that they agree to a council tax freeze or face even bigger gaps in their budget is frankly outrageous. Can you just imagine, Conference, if the Westminster government issued a similar diktat to the SNP government in Holyrood? I bet you that the penguins of Patagonia would hear the howling from Holyrood if that ever happened. The SNP promised to scrap the council tax in 2007. They've completely failed to deliver on that commitment. like many others, or to develop a credible alternative. If the SNP want to demand a council tax freeze, they need to fully fund it, not shortchange our local communities. They must ensure that the warm words contained within the Verity House Agreement actually are worth the paper that they are written on. They need to meet with council leaders urgently to discuss their budget allocation, and they need to ensure that they have tripartite discussions with leaders and trade unions to ensure COSLA have the means to make a fair and timely pay offer to the workforce to avoid another year of industrial action. And that must provide sufficient funding to meet the commitment to deliver a minimum underpinning rate of pay of £15 an hour for all local government workers by the 1st of April 2026. Thank you, Conference.
So thank you, Joanna, and thank you for all you do to defend local government funding, not just today, but every day. But I should have been clearer about the statement. So that was related to motion 19, as I said, on public service funding, but it also covered the Scottish Young Labour and also covered the emergency motion 2 on a fair deal for local government workers and services. Now, I want to invite Scottish Young Labour to second the statement made by Joanna on the motion and the emergency motion. You're very welcome.
Harry Ness, Scottish Young Labour delegate, first-time speaker. Cuts to the funding settlement of local authorities puts pressure on the delivery of educational services, leisure and social work, all of which are extremely important to young people. The 2024-25 Scottish Budget is a real terms cut to budgets and follows the successive years of cuts to local government funding by the SNP government in Holyrood. The failure of the current Scottish Government to properly fund their proposed council tax freeze has left councillors across the country making devastating decisions about which services to cut and which ones to protect. The Herald reported in July last year that 9 of Scotland's 32 local authorities were unable to meet their statutory obligation to provide suitable temporary accommodation for homeless people. The same report details that the lack of access to social housing is a crisis that is impacting young people severely as well, because the number of households in temporary accommodation in Scotland is roughly 14,000, and of that number, just over 9,000 are children. Here in Glasgow specifically, the lack of social housing capacity and accessibility is increasing homelessness. The dire state of local government finance is inflicting this on people. A report on housing in Scotland released in July last year by Solace Scotland detailed that Glasgow's housing associations alone had roughly 64,500 people on their social housing waiting list last year. In Falkirk, suffocating cuts to local government finances has forced the Bowness Recreation Centre to close, whilst the Falkirk Herald reported in November last year as well that similar services such as school swimming pools and other leisure centres are also at risk of closure. Facilities like this are crucial to supporting young people, especially post-pandemic. The reality is that the facilities that we take for granted are under threat due to the terminal way that local government is currently being financed. Focusing on education, a teacher based in the Scottish Borders told me, psychological services such as CAMHS are completely overwhelmed. For young people seeking support, it has become harder to do so. It has also hindered the ability of services to actively try and reach out to young people when they are already so overwhelmed. The Scottish Government needs to meet with COSLA and council leaders to discuss the budget. This settlement must deliver a fair pay deal for council workers, and the Scottish Government needs to engage in tripartite talks with council leaders and trade unions on delivering a pay offer and funding for council workers amidst the ongoing cost of living crisis. It will be the responsibility of a future Scottish Labour government to reset the relationship between central and local government in Scotland. This will also require the delivery of fair funding for local communities, and consideration of how this can be achieved should be carried out by the Scottish Policy Forum. Designing the funding formula and package of measures required to deliver fair funding should consider the entirety of funding resource options available to both central and local government and should be informed by independent financial experts. When Scottish Government budgets increase, so too should those of local authorities. Only then can we start to decentralise power from Holyrood and unleash the potential of Scottish devolution. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you for an excellent first speech to Conference. We can now move on to motion 20 on safer politics. You're very welcome. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Margaret Smith, Falkirk West, CLP. It's wonderful to see such a number of women standing for Labour at the general election, and I wish them well. Falkirk has selected a young, very able, energetic candidate, Ewan Steenbank. And with these selections comes our responsibility to ensure that all candidates from every background are supported and that they feel that they can trust our party to look after them. We must work to gain trust in politics for all people and that the political system can work for everyone at all levels. I'm a grandma to Sky Rose. She's a 17-year-old young woman who's hoping that the next general election is in the early autumn so that she can cast her vote. Her birthday is in July, so please listen, Rishi Sunak, wherever you are. She is very interested in politics, but can I truly, hand on heart, say to her that politics is a safe option as a career, given, as we know, the recent attacks on MPs and local councillors? I, like most people here, am truly sickened by reports and cases of sleaze, the perception of a predatory culture within politics and in daily life. Young people should never feel that they should comply by sitting on someone's knee to stop harassment. This type of behaviour must stop, and stop now. We fully support the continuing work being done by Katie Clark and Pauline McNeill on ending violence against women and girls. But we also need to take the first step by having in place a clear reporting system for our politicians in Westminster and Holyrood. It should also encompass our local councillors, our party workers and party activists. We should all feel safe, be respected and have faith in a robust reporting system whereby appropriate action is taken to fully investigate reports of unfair treatment, bullying and harassment, and that proper sanctions are imposed on the perpetrators. Let's clean up politics for all. We are calling for change. Let's change perception. Change starts here. Change starts now. Change starts with Scottish Labour. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Okay, and I understand that is seconded from the floor. I'm sure your granddaughter's very proud of you, but but I really hope she's disappointed when we have the election sooner rather than later, to be honest. So this has been a really good debate, and we've covered such a wide range of issues, but unfortunately we're right up against the clock, so there's not going to be any time for many speeches from the floor. I want to move on now to welcome Mark Griffin MSP, the Shadow Minister for Local Government and Housing, to close this debate.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, delegates from across our movement, driving home the change we need in 2024. The change Labour and Government can and will deliver for stronger, safer communities. But, Conference, we can only deliver that change in government. Change that we know is as urgent as ever. Because in this city, 2,900 children woke up in temporary accommodation last year. Thousands of young lives, Glasgow's future, holed up in damp, cold, cramped accommodation they can't call their own. And for 115 households, they had to suffer it, waiting for a home for 3 years, over 1,000 days in a hotel or hostel. A trauma we know will haunt people their whole lives, that will be woven through every decision they make, whether they can take a new job, if they can afford a move, and when the time comes, how they'll protect their own children. Conference, that is no start in life. Be in no doubt, we are in a housing emergency. And even SNP-run Glasgow is brave enough to admit it, while their own government can't. The new housing minister, outright refusing to declare what is obvious to everyone else. The First Minister, an MSP barely a mile down the road and still too weak to do anything about the misery right here. In Conference, what's their answer? To blame everyone else, to botch a rent freeze, to rip up housing targets, to slash housing budgets, to take Tory cuts and multiply them. Conference, we know that SNP are just like the Tories, two out-of-touch governments in lockstep, devoid of any economic strategy, intensifying the housing emergency and planning for decline. In Conference, it's our children, it's the first-time buyers, it's the pensioners desperate to stay in their home, it's the workers building the homes, it's our sons, our daughters, our friends and family, all overcrowded and unable to buy somewhere of their own, all stuck in unfit homes or on waiting lists, all abandoned by the SNP, paying the price for SNP and Tory economic incompetence, paying the price for their housing emergency. But Conference, it doesn't have to be that way. The answers come from our movement, from this city. It was 100 years ago. Glasgow sent Wheatley into government to deliver Labour's 1924 Housing Act. 100 years. 100 years ago, he saw then how much the damp, cold, costly housing was harming this city's health. And the result, friends, the result was us, Labour, in government, building over 500,000 council houses for low-income families. And remember that when you're on the doors this year. The answers come from our movement. They come from this city. Labour governments delivering the housing we need, delivering change, giving people hope. It's a reminder, if we ever needed it, we must build our way out of this housing emergency. And friends, the number of young people who own their own home, it's never recovered to the same level as when Labour was last in government. For too many young people, home ownership has become a distant dream. And we all know somebody, our kids, cousins, grandkids, priced out of home ownership, still living with parents or forced to deal with the SNP's sky-high rents and their failure to deliver the homes we need. That's before we even get to the double whammy of soaring house prices and the Tory interest rate bombshell pushing mortgages through the roof. So I'm pleased to announce that Scottish Labour is promising a package of reforms to make that dream a reality once again. We'll rip up the punitive rules, locking low-income buyers out of government support schemes. We'll get them on the ladder and get a home they can call their own. In Conference, we make sure homes are built in all tenures, homes that are affordable to own. We'll use planning rules to make sure cheaper homes delivered on every site by expanding discounted sales. Homes discounted at the point they're sold, with that discount passing on to the next buyer too, creating positive change, generations of affordable home ownership, building the homes people want, that chance to make a place their own, unlocking the economic benefits of a strong housing sector. Conference, Scottish Labour is ready to tackle this housing emergency, ramp up supply in every tenure and put home ownership within reach once again. This country is crying out for change and Scottish Labour will deliver it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mark. Thank you. It's good to end the day with such a rousing speech. We're not quite there yet. We've got some votes to work through. So the SEC, of course, approves all the motions as presented in this session. So I just want to go through them one by one. As before, a show of hands is hopefully all we need. So I'm going to start with composite motion 8 on sub-postmasters. Please raise your hands if you support that composite motion. Anyone against? Excellent, thank you. Composite motion 9 on the housing emergency. Can you raise your hands if you support? Anyone against? Okay, thank you. Composite motion 10 on women's rights. Can you raise your hands if you're in support of that motion? Anyone against? Oh, yeah. So, please be respectful, please be respectful, please be respectful. Can we, well, I think this will have to go to a card vote. I add a little bit of tension. Add a little bit of tension. Motion 17 on rural, well, sorry, we'll come back to the card vote at the end of this voting session, sorry, just to save a bit of time. So if you can get your paperwork ready, actually, you should be, I'll confirm this, but it'll be card vote 1, and it'll be a pink pack. Just go through the remaining votes, then we'll come back to that one. Motion 17 on rural services. Can you put your hand up if you're in support? And if you're against? Okay, good. Motion 18, assaults on justice services. Again, sorry, 4. Almost tricked you there. Is there anyone against? Okay. The SEC statement on local government funding as presented by Joe. Are we for that? Anyone, well, who's for that, sorry? Anyone against? That's carried. Motion 20 on safer politics. Are we for? Anyone against? Okay, that's carried. So we just have that, just to have that card vote on motion 10. So I'm just going to read out the statement, just instructions for this. Well, you can all rustle with your envelopes to get the pink pack out. So we're going to have a card vote. Can I ask tellers and scrutineers to come to the front of the hall to collect the ballot boxes? Please. Are they? Do you have people available? Yeah. So they're lined up? Excellent. So with delegates, so it's only delegates who vote. Within your packs, you will find several card votes. The card we're going to vote for will be 1, which is pink. Card votes are either for the motion or against it. There's no rush here, but please hold your card vote ballot in the air once you've decided how you're going to vote, and the tellers will collect the papers. But don't feel rushed, please. The people are already ready. Madam, you're holding up something that's white. I think it should be pink.
Put your hand up.
What's she saying? What's this lady saying?
She's saying something about pink.
It's a preprint. A preprint.
You need a reprint.
Oh, okay. Every day's a school day. Yeah. Preprint. I don't know if.
Or a reprint. The reprint's away. They lost it and reprinted, so we know it's
Go to work from there.
You left it in a pub last night, probably.
You should have known. You'd have gone and collected it.
I've got it. Well, sorry. Okay, so just don't want to interrupt things, but I see people are starting to leave. I just want to say something before people leave. I will repeat this before people leave, or they're off anyway. Is that when you're leaving the venue this evening, either now or after the Fringe, what security is asking you to do is leave via the main concourse. So you go straight ahead when you go through those double doors, and then you'll be turning right. Another piece of advice is before you leave the building, you should remove your identity tag from around your neck and stick it in your pocket or your bag. Okay? I'll repeat that. So I think Tracy's still got a vote over there in the corner. There's one in the corner there. One in the corner. That's me. Is everybody past their votes now? I'm quite keen to... Are you okay? Why can't they vote? Oh, he's not. So, well...
Kieran, there's a...
So this is a final call for anybody who's still to vote. As far as I know, everybody's handed their votes over. Okay, right. So I think we can close that ballot now, so thank you very much to the tellers. So what's going to happen is overnight they're going to count the votes up and we'll hear the result tomorrow, okay? And that will come via the CEC report first thing tomorrow morning. So, so I just want to very quickly draw this session to an end. It's been quite a good day. We've had a respectful debate around Gaza and also women's rights, despite this going to a vote. And I was really pleased with the NHS debate as well, which we had. I hope you have a great evening this evening. Of course, I want you to visit the Fringe before you leave the building. And remember that last point about leaving the venue via the concourse and removing your security badges before you do so. Okay, have a great night.